Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I was 28 at the time, well, roughly round about that age. I'm not sure exactly, nor do I specifically recall what I was doing driving down a remote country road in the late evening, not far from my family home in Sandpoint, a rural, relaxed, friendly, conservative town, which at one point in time was named America's most beautiful town. As far as I'm concerned, it still is, but then I'm naturally biased, as I have lived in this idyllic part of the world all my life, rather like a perennial wildflower that bursts into blossom every summer, gracing the same part of the flowery meadow with its bountiful blooms. Equally, I thrive season after season, year after year, living in this warm, welcoming, convivial part of the world. Our illustrious, enchanting, whimsical town is on the northern tip of Idaho, situated on the 43-mile lake, Pend Oreille, surrounded by the Selkirk, Cabinet and Bitterroot mountain ranges. It's a quintessential part of the world, long revered for its stunning ski slopes, bountiful biking trails, marvellous footpaths, and Native American artifacts in Bonner Valley. The summers here are pleasantly warm, dry, partly cloudy, but the winters are invariably freezing, exceedingly overcast. As I was saying, the reason why I was driving down this remote road during the late evening has somehow conveniently escaped me, extinguishing itself from my mind like a rubber erasing an insignificant pencil-written note. It seems to have become obscure in my memory, erroneously vague if you like. I do remember everything else that happened that night, as vividly, clearly, and concisely as I would recall a bold, bright picture staring me brazenly in the face. Regretfully, my memory over the rest of the evening is staggeringly detailed, indelibly entrenched or seared in my brain, like the purple ink on the yellow fat of a butcher's leg of lamb. It was in the late summer, veering towards early autumn. Slowly but surely the warm days were increasingly overcast, ebbing away progressively as cooler weather was laying down her early foundations to embrace the fleeting autumn, preparing ultimately for the arrival of the soon-to-be firmly established winter. There was a definite bite in the air. It was a gloomy night, made worse by a complete lack of street lights, or for that matter any nearby comforting, reassuring bright lights of people's homes. I was driving my white truck down the long white ribbon of asphalt. The ground on either side of the road was slightly elevated, with a small rocky clearing that sprawled out into a thick area of forest filled with logpole pines, spruces, hemlocks, ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees. I remember collecting my thoughts together, ever grateful that I was not out in the elements, for the night itself cast a doleful impression upon me. I could not put a finger on it. Perhaps it was how dark and foreboding everything appeared. I do believe that the constellations that evening had put on a miserable showing, for there was a tiny crescent moon serenaded by scant clusters of silvery stars that were like diamonds clouded by dust particles, well in need of a good clean from the jewellers, as their display was dull, obscure, faint. Perhaps they were shrouded by cloud cover. I could not be certain, for it was not discernible to the naked eye. But indeed, everything was very inconspicuous. I could see the distinctive, sultry silhouettes of the tall, masterful pyramid-shaped trees towering in the sky like emerald giants. But they didn't look green on this night, for the darkness had stolen their colourful vibrancy, saturating the trees in a murky, formidable, pretentious darkness, more solid and dense than the sky itself. I knew the discussion on the radio about vampires was doing little to calm my rising trepidation, increasing feelings of angst that seemed nonsensical to me. Perhaps in the deep recesses of my soul, I knew on a gut level that this unpleasantly hostile night was a prelude to something quite dreadful that would ultimately leave a lasting impression on my life, like a noxious, nasty smell on a garment that you could never wash away. But do you, Lisa, really think that Count Dracula was real? I heard the radio host saying. Oh, yes, he was definitely real, came a woman's authoritative voice. I've done a lot of research in the matter myself, after becoming completely hooked on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Do you know that Prince Charles came from the Dracula bloodline? The host sounded sceptical. Really? I haven't heard that before. As for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I positively detested that programme on television. Come on, it was only a bit of fun. So you slay the vampire with a big stake through the heart, is that right? Is that the only way that you can kill them? That's right, it's the only way. It's a stake through the heart every time. Well, thank you, Lisa, for your very valuable, interesting input. If you have anything to say on the matter, folks, give us a call on 553961. I shuddered as I listened to the conversation that finally morphed into drinking human blood. Could the conversation get more depraved than this, I wondered. I trembled in disgust momentarily, taking one of my hands off the wheel to adjust the station to something more light-hearted. That was better, I thought. I could hear the voice of Sheena Easton breaking through the radio waves. What a relief! A stark contrast to the grotesque descriptions of blood-sucking vampires. In that poignant moment, it was almost as if time stood alarmingly still, as if someone held it back in the palm of their hand, suspending it for a moment. I saw a figure running across the road, inches away from my truck. Bloody hell, I thought, trying desperately to brake as I slammed my foot on the pedal as hard as I could. It was too late. I heard the ominous thud, the boom. I felt my car's slight resistance as my rubber tyres bumped, veering over something quite substantial, sizable. I could hear the squashing, crunching, pulverising sounds of flesh and bones. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'd killed someone. No one could survive such a hit. It wasn't even possible. My car ground to a halt, stopping in the middle of the road. I cupped my hands over my mouth, trying to process what had just transpired in those dramatic seconds. I stared into space vacantly as waves of dread descended down my spine, while a nauseating bitter taste engulfed the back of my throat. It was with great reluctance and trepidation I opened my car door, getting out into the road to inspect the dreadful carnage. I peered beneath the undercarriage of my car, and there, lying in the road, was a dead body. I got back into my car, manoeuvring it slightly out of the way, so I could see this grisly sight ever more clearly. It was a man in his 40s or 50s, wearing an anorak hoodie and casual jeans. My tyre had run through the middle of his torso, obliterating the flesh separating the shoulders, head and upper breast from the lower waist, pelvis and legs. My car had glided over his body relatively smoothly, without much of a backlash, other than a few desperate stalls, as I tried my damnedest to slam down the brakes. I had squashed him under the heavy weight of my rubber tyre, like a fly under a squatter. I stared in horror, leaning over the man, trying to shake his arm as though to wake him up. But of course he didn't respond. How could he? His eyes were glazed over like a dead fish, staring blankly out into the night. What the hell had I done, I wondered. I was completely mortified. For a long while I was staring in the middle of the road, as though hypnotised by the macabre sight staring back at me. I had killed this man. The reality of this appalling revelation hit me hard like an icy-cold bucket of water thrust over my head. I felt like a murderer. I had deprived this man of the God-given right for him to have life. In a trice I heard these heavy feet pounding the road, moving swiftly towards me at one hell of a speed. I could hear the thump, thump, thump as they neared their approach. I could feel my heart growing heavy with shame, remorse, regret. How I so wished I could turn back the hands of time, undo these last frantic moments. Perhaps if I'd continued listening to that Dracula discussion instead of changing the channel to something lighter, I could have stopped the truck in time. Could this get any worse, I thought. Someone had been eyewitness to this horror. Then I saw her standing there. Her expression was exceedingly grim. Her deep-set dark eyes glanced from me to the dead body, back to me again, as though she was rotating balls in her long feminine hands, rather like a juggler. I could sense she was saying, "What the heck have you done?" This was not a normal woman by any manner of means, but she was unequivocally female, very human-looking. The only difference was she was covered in long, flowing dark hair. The exquisite colour and sheen of a raven's feathers, that was the texture of human hair. It swathed and adorned her lofty athletic body, with the exception of her face and palms, in a luxurious mohair-like coat that gleamed with health, but was less abundant under the arm area, as if the chafing of skin had worn away some of that hair. Never even for a fleeting second did anything about this woman remind me of an ape. She towered at about 7 feet tall, with long, lean, muscular legs, shapely, well-toned, overlong arms, a powerful, well-developed pair of shoulders. I noticed the large torso was extensively wide, especially over the top area of her body, slimming down to a faint suggestion of a waist, but there was not much of one. Her breasts were like empty, sagging pockets that hung down low on her chest, as though completely drained of their contents. Her leathery, heart-shaped face was exceedingly feminine. The skin shone like a glittering new penny, the colour of coal. She had kind, generous, expressive eyes. Her nose was flat, aquatic, her cheekbones high, her lips were slender. In these poignant moments, it was almost as if my reality had swung out of control, like a train that had completely derailed itself. It was almost as if the course of events unfolding before my eyes were not real. They were like a movie or a dream, something that didn't align with what I perceived as normal. The deceased body of the man, sliced in half, was a victim of my truck, along with the strange anomalies of the hairy woman staring at me. Her indignant, peeved expression did very little to quash the dreadful guilt galloping through my body, like a thunderous herd of bison across the American plains, even though she reminded me of a cave woman who did not speak a word of English. I felt I owed her dutifully an explanation for what I'd done. She looked offended, like a mother waiting to hear her son's excuses for his absurd, atrocious behaviour that warranted some form of justification or appeasement. Her look was identical to my mother's when I was a kid and had stolen something from the larder. Disagreeable, disappointed, beleaguered. "It wasn't my fault," I said, pointing at the body. "He ran out in front of my truck. I could hardly stop in time. Believe me, I tried." The female creature continued to stare at me, as if my words had fallen on deaf ears, as if she couldn't comprehend the enormity of what I'd done. I could feel her extreme disappointment, rather like a knife cutting through me with an ice-cold blade. I stammered uneasily, "I'm going." I quickly ran over to my driver's door, opening it very swiftly, getting into the truck. My focus was to drive home, to tell my wife exactly what I'd done, not to call the police. Well, not yet. I couldn't. I needed to process things first, digest everything, come to terms with this shocking atrocity. I drove down the long dusty driveway, cycling up dirt and the odd random pebble beneath my rubber tyres. Finally I parked under the carport next to our pretty little stone house in the heart of the valley. I ran through to the bedroom. My wife was fast asleep. I began to shake her vigorously. She groaned disapprovingly. "I'm trying to sleep. What's your problem?" She sat up suddenly, looking at me with a dismayed look. She could sense the horror on my face. "I've just killed someone." "You what?" "I've just killed someone." My wife looked mortified. "You killed someone? Who? When? How? Why?" "I ran over a man in the road. My wheels sliced his body in half." "Oh no! Oh no!" My wife looked appalled. You ran over a man? How could you? Why didn't you stop in time? What happened?" "That's the problem. I don't really know. It happened so fast. Just like when people run over a deer in the road. It was like that." "Oh my God! How dreadful!" said my wife, cradling me in her arms. "It's not your fault. It could have happened to anyone. I'm just so glad you're all right." "Yes, but sweetheart, the least I can do is to come forward. Admit to the police what happened. If I don't, it makes me a monster. A hit-and-run driver that's failing to take responsibility. I can't stand people like that. I have to man up to this, admit to what I've done. If I don't, and they should find that I'm responsible for running over this man, my lack of cooperation with the law will make me appear the guilty party." "What about me? What about our children? What if you go to jail for this?" "Look, sweetheart, it was an accident, not a deliberate act of murder. There is a big difference." So there I was in the office at the police station, fiddling with my fingers nervously, feeling like a guilty criminal about to confess a duplicitous crime. The gravity of what I'd done hung over me like a heavy pair of block-out curtains around a window pane. I watched as the detective inspector pulled up his chair. He had a notepad in his hands. He wasn't a bad-looking man, in his early 40s, 50s or 60s, with a full head of dark hair, swept away neatly from his face. He had a strong masculine jawline, where the skin looked freshly shaved. He was wearing plain clothes, a neat cotton shirt, a smart pair of caramel pants, long pointed boots. He stared at me through his dark brown eyes. "So I gather you claim you've run over someone in the middle of the road. Am I right?" "That's right," I said. I gave the other detective the exact coordinates of where it occurred. "Can you tell me what happened?" "Sure. I was driving down the road in my truck. Then I saw the shadowy figure of a man running out into the road, yards away from my truck like a deer. Sometimes they do that in this part of the world. I couldn't stop in time, detective. I really tried, but it was too late. The damage was already done." "Did you see the dead body?" "Of course I saw it, detective." "Can you describe it to me? What did it look like?" "What do you want me to say, detective? It was gruesome. It was a mess. I ran through his middle. You really don't want to know those graphic details." "Oh, but I do. Can you describe what the man looked like on his face? I imagine you did look at his face, am I right?" "Well, I think he was in his 40s, but I'm never very good with age, detective. He had dark brown, thick hair. No sign of a receding hairline. But there was a maturity to him, so he could have been older. Creases around his hazel eyes. A few crinkle lines on the forehead. I think he was slim-built. Not athletic, though. His skin was exceedingly pale." I watched as the officer wrote down the details, his wrist obscuring the writing. I had visions going through my mind of his writing, "Guilty, guilty, guilty as charged." "Did the front of your car sustain any damage?" "Well, there is some blood and guts on the crowbar, if that's what you're talking about. It's a bit bent, buckled in, but not very bad." "The problem with your claim, mister?" "The name is Paul McIntyre, sir." "As I was saying, Mr. McIntyre, I've just had a call at the station. The police have searched the coordinates you gave them. There is no sign of a dead corpse on the road, as you so claim, nor has there been any recent reports of a missing man fitting your description. It would seem there is a brown patch in the road that has tested positive for blood, but the body is missing, nowhere to be seen, completely vanished." "But I don't understand. I promise you, detective, I ran over that man. He was lying dead in the road. I saw him myself. I even grabbed his arm, hoping to wake him up, but of course he was a goner. Supposing I believe that what you are saying is true, but you're not confessing to an erroneous hit and run, it would seem that someone has unwittingly removed the body from the road. So if it wasn't you cleaning up after yourself to hide the evidence, then I ask you, who was it? And why would they remove the body? He asked that, looking at me for any signs of deception on my face. Of course I wouldn't do that, Detective. I promise you I never removed that body. What kind of trouble am I in, Detective, for running over a man like this? Well, under the circumstances, you can hardly be charged without a body, can you? Said the detective. But there are all kinds of ramifications. The least would be paying a fine of about $10,000, losing your license, or being charged with criminal negligence, unintentional vehicle manslaughter, or involuntary manslaughter, the latter meaning a prison sentence of about 4 years, depending, of course, on the case. The judge's conclusions, stuff like that. There are lots of variables in every Pacific case. So what must I do, Detective? Go home. That's the best advice I can give you. We'll be in touch with you shortly. Naturally, we need to impound your truck, see if we can find any DNA on it. But without a body at this stage, there's not much we can do. The case is in limbo. We have had no reports of a missing man either. I walked away from the police station, feeling worse than ever. I had felt that confessing to the accident would make me feel significantly better, but it made me feel 1,000 times worse. How could the body have vanished like that, disappeared into thin air? Then I remembered the hair-covered wild woman. Could she have taken it, I wondered? It was a distinct possibility. I didn't think she would have taken it to eat, but possibly to bury. She had seemed rather distressed by what I had done to the strange man. It was the only thing that would make sense to me. Of course I couldn't mention her to the detective, as I would sound as if I was off my trolley. My wife had persuaded me not to mention the wild woman, who she was certain was a creature known as a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Don't go telling the detective about her, she warned. They'll think you've lost your marbles. The detective had given me a car to use, while they impounded mine to take some DNA samples, so I decided to return to the accident scene. And sure enough, there was no sign of the body there in the road, only a brown patch. It was almost as if nothing had transpired. It was so bizarre. I decided to search the woods to see if I could see any sign of the body in there. The cell phone in my pocket began to ring, so I pulled it out. "Hello, is that Paul McIntyre?" "Speaking," I said. "It's Detective Conway Richards speaking. We met earlier." "That's right," I said. "Any news, Detective?" "Well, there is a boarding house that has reported a German backpacker vanishing. Never returned last night, I gather. He fits the description of the man you ran over. The trouble is there's no wallet, no identification, no passport on him. We have absolutely no clue who he is at the moment. We're checking with the airlines, with the German embassy, to see if we can get any leads." "But why is his passport not with his stuff?" I asked. "You say the man was wearing an anorak. Maybe he took his passport and wallet with him. Maybe they're in his pockets." "I see," I said. "I'll keep you posted," said the detective. "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate that." I climbed up the rocky embankment, walked into the wooded area, not sure what to make of anything that had just transpired. I felt this vacuous hollow in the pit of my stomach, knowing that I'd run down someone's family member. I had dreadful visions of a trail of broken hearts, spilled tears, devastated relatives whose lives were ruined on my account. It made absolutely no sense that the man had run into the road in front of me, leaving me no opportunity to stop. Surely he had seen me. This case was rarely curious, to say the least. As I walked through the serene ponderosa pine trees that towered into the sky like graceful giants, I scanned the forest floor for any sign of a body, but I saw absolutely nothing. Everything was so peaceful, blissfully tranquil, radiantly beautiful. It was easy to forget the horrors of the previous night. I could smell the fragrant, sweet butterscotch-like scent of the trees. The forest floor was soft, marshy beneath my feet, dotted with pretty ferns and pretty ground covers. I could hear the enchanting bird song. Then the phone rang again. It's Detective Conway again. Hello, Detective. We found the passport. Very interesting developments, you'll be pleased to know. Interesting case. Very interesting. So who is he, Detective, then? His name is Hans Friedrich. He's 45 years old. Sounds German, I said. Yes, he is. Well, this Hans Friedrich informed his girlfriend he was going to America. He told her he was never coming back. She couldn't understand what he was saying, as he hasn't got a green card, so how can he live here? I gather he'd suffered from serious depression for a very long time. Last year he tried to throw himself in front of a bus in Frankfurt, but luckily the driver stopped in time. You mean, Detective, that he ran in front of my truck deliberately? Is that what you're saying? The girlfriend appears to think so. She thinks he took a trip to America to end it all for himself. She said the way he was behaving was not normal. He's not been normal for a very long time, according to her. Then, of course, I spoke to the owner of the boarding house. Now, she says the man was exceedingly weird, asking all kinds of curious questions about country roads with little traffic passing through. She said he seemed very dark and depressed, found hundreds of beer cans strewn around his room. Not a good sign, possibly a bit of Dutch courage required to do what he did, I imagine. Couldn't he have committed suicide on his own home turf, Detective, rather than coming all the way to America? Isn't that overkill? Maybe he wanted to do it away from his loved ones, to avoid causing them too much distress, especially after the bus accident. But there is the question of the body. Where the heck is it? I don't know, Detective. I've no idea. Well, there is some good news for you. If this is a suicide, you're off the hook. No charges will be brought against you. It's looking exceedingly good for you. Keep your fingers crossed. I will. Thanks, Detective, for phoning. After the phone call, I was flooded with waves of relief, knowing that there was a strong chance the man had run out deliberately in front of my car. It was very strange that he had selected a remote country road in Idaho to finish himself off. Why not an all-consuming interstate where you would be guaranteed to be mowed down? I phoned up my wife to reveal to her the latest findings from the police. I spoke to Detective Conway, I told her. He reckons the man we believe I ran over came here to America to end his own life. Is that not very strange? Very, said my wife. What I don't get is why he would choose a remote country road here in Idaho to end it all, not a busy interstate. Oh, I think I understand, said my wife. I mean, a dirty country road is quite peaceful, isn't it? Away from prying eyes, crowds of people, witnesses. Also, he could take his time, decide when he was going to run out into the road to end it all. If you're standing on a busy interstate, the pressures on you are going to get immense. I mean, how long do you want to stand there in the roaring traffic? Maybe he wanted to do things in his own time, without an audience. I suppose you have a point there. Still, what would make a man so distressed he'd kill himself? I don't know, said my wife. It's desperately sad. People kill themselves for all kinds of tragic reasons. Switching off my cell phone, I noticed a discernible movement in the branches. Leaves twitched, swayed, were pushed aside like a curtain of shrubbery. Then I saw her, a tall, shadowy silhouette, revealing herself, making her prominent presence known to me. She unhesitantly glided through the pines with incredible grace, poise, elegance, beelining towards me. To my astonishment, it was no other than the elusive, mysterious female wild woman that I had seen the previous night. It was clear she recognized me immediately. The wild woman's raven-colour hair gleamed, twinkled in the sunlight. As strange as this might sound, I thought she looked quite magnificent, lofty, majestic, imposing. She looked at me directly in the eyes. We had a moment together, like a meeting between two souls, an intimate connection that I will always treasure as long as I live. I felt a bonding with her that perhaps only two people can share who have both witnessed a devastating event together. Her brown eyes had lost their condemning look. To date, they are quite literally the most exquisite eyes I have ever seen. Who knew that eyes the colour of the darkest treacle could be so incredibly mesmerising? She pointed to the road with her overlong arms, looking at me directly in the eyes, as if to say she remembered what had happened. She pointed to herself, to the ground beneath us, making a digging movement with her hands, as if to say she'd buried the man. In my mind I thought she was saying, I need not worry. I never ever saw her again, but I do remember her fondly, as someone who touched my life so dramatically, in a matter of seconds. All these years later I look on that event with much sadness, as I feel so much compassion for Hans Friedrich. Regretfully his body was never discovered, or ever found, but the family believed he'd come to America to take his own life. The manner in which he took his life leaves more questions than answers, but at least I can live with myself knowing that this man intentionally chose to take his life. Why he chose that remote piece of road, I will never know. Fortunately, I was never charged with the incident. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. The woman was likely in her late 60s, early 70s. It was hard to tell, as guessing someone's age was not as straightforward as it may seem. But with her shock of white hair that was skillfully layered in a flattering short-cropped hairstyle, you could say the hair colour itself was a giveaway as to her approximate age. It was attractive on her noble-looking refined face. It was clear she was one of those handsome women that improved with age, like a well-matured wine, that is at its very best once it has mellowed, so that any appreciative wine drinker that knows his stuff can easily detect the underlying subtle fruity and woody notes that a layman might not be so quick to discern. The woman had something unique about her demeanour that made you give her a second glance. She exuded a warm, congenial energy that lit up the entire room like a cosy, crackling fire on a cold winter's day, although in this case with soaring, unforgivable dry temperatures that had ruthlessly battered and devoured the entire countryside. With a furious, merciless heat, the woman's unexpected, serendipitous appearance was like a refreshing rain shower on a scorchingly hot day. She had a pleasing presence about her that got your attention, rather like an interesting book at the library that you're curious to read. The skin on her face was peachy, as if she had not been exposed to too much sun over the years. Either that, or she'd taken remarkably good care of herself by wearing a sun hat at all times. Her fair porcelain complexion was smooth, but the area around the contours of her chin and jowl area was slightly on the saggy side, as you would expect at her time of life. Her lively blue eyes were feathered by fine lines and wrinkles that made her all the more endearing. It was strange that this older woman, who no one had ever seen before, had entered the bar and was not remotely self-conscious. She had boldly swept past the male patrons with an effortless ease, not remotely concerned about the attention she had obviously aroused, if indeed she was aware of it at all. You'd think she'd feel self-conscious being the only woman in the bar like this, but the thought had not even trespassed across her mind, or troubled her thoughts in the slightest. You could tell at once this self-assured, assertive woman was definitely not from around these parts. Her clothing also appeared to stand out, as being different as to what the local woman would ultimately wear, whose sensible, robust clothes complemented their outdoor lifestyle most favourably. This woman was elegantly attired, wearing flared white cotton trousers with flattering bootleg bottoms, and a blue and white very smart striped top. Let's just say wearing white during a Wyoming summer was not exactly the best idea, if you were an outdoor type, that is. The colour would not likely stay white for terribly long, and you would know this very well if you were a local resident here. Frolicking with white, by any manner of means, was not sensible in weather like this, when the country was as dry and parched as an old leather boot. It was a late Thursday afternoon, teetering towards the early evening. A few men were liberally scattered around the bar, like a plethora of tired autumn leaves. They were heartily enjoying beers after a hard day's work, and engaged in some light banter among themselves. Many were discussing the cruel summer weather, and how heartlessly it had affected the countryside, robbing it of all its intrinsic beauty,
so that the scorched grass looked as if someone had thrown a bucket of bleach all over it, almost as if it has been through too many cycles in the washing machine, and was faded, dull, and tired-looking. Not that this was terribly unusual for Wyoming, that was well known for its dry weather. And as for the livestock, they were suffering from the unrelentless heat, many being attacked by far too many blowflies that were becoming a major problem for the locals, who were beating away the flies like a swarm of locusts. Some of the ranchers were devising schemes to eliminate them as efficiently as they possibly could, as flies were flying into open orifices like ears and eyes and bothering the animals, so that all the horses were wearing nets over their heads to keep out these tenacious intruders. One farmer was buying sticky sheets, which he wrapped around a large bin, and claimed there wasn't a space on the sticky sheets left where there wasn't a fly stuck to it, as so huge had the problem become. He claimed he steadfastly repeated the process 3 to 4 times a day. But getting rid of these nasty little critters was a huge relief to the horses and steers. As to why there were no women around in the bar, it was probably not the right time of the day to attract the fairer of the sexes. All eyes turned to look at the older woman, who had entered the bar as if suddenly a cool gust of fresh air had blown into the premises, offering a refreshing coolness to the late afternoon. Everyone looked decidedly frazzled. Men who had been laboriously labouring outdoors since the early hours of the morning looked fatigued, as if all their energy had been expunged by the blistering temperatures that knew no mercy. It would seem tired hair hung loosely around their faces in curtains of sweaty, grimy dirt, and their skins were covered with the residues of dust, dirt, and even oil. The countryside was begging for rain. Ostensibly all were relieved to be basking in the shaded, cool ambience of the bar, to gain light refreshment, with icy cold beers in hands that were quick to soothe away the blemished bruises and aches of the day, like a calming antiseptic lotion or a long relaxing indulgent soak in the bath. At one end of the bar 2 men were happily playing darts together and laughing a great deal, and at the other end there were 4 men who were playing a game of quarters. By all accounts no one had ever seen this woman before, in this quaint, rather charming small town in Wyoming. But news travelled fast around here, especially if there was a new arrival in town, that always demanded the curiosity of the locals. This stranger stood out from among them. The woman was so obviously different from people around here, and the fact that she was mature in her years deepened the inquisitive inquiries among the patrons, all lightly thinking the very same thing. Who was she? The woman moved with a certain amount of grace towards the exquisite handcrafted oakwood bar, as if drawn towards it by an invisible thread. She didn't look like the type who made a habit of drowning her sorrows in alcohol. She couldn't wait to plant her tired derriere on the comfortable-looking bar stool and lift her exhausted feet off the ground, as the weather had drained her of all her energy, and she felt like an old beaten-down car that had run out of gas and was beginning to stall and rattle as it warily chugged along the road, looking as if it was about to come to a permanent standstill. Of course the woman had experienced vindictively spiteful weather like this before, but no one ever got used to boiling temperatures like this, that were brutal to say the very least. The young, handsomely turned-out barman, standing behind the bar, was casually dressed in a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, with the logo Buzzard's Honey, with a phone number at the bottom of the label, along with a Wyoming address. The barman was known to the locals as Chancer, and he was a good-looking lad. He worked tirelessly with his father running the family efficient mechanic shop, but liked to take on a few shifts at the bar regularly, as a way of earning spare change. Well, that's the excuse he told his father, who made no sense of it, as he earned good money working for him. The truth was that Chance's father would never comprehend that his son genuinely enjoyed socializing and interacting with the people, and working behind the bar enabled him to get to know the locals better than most. Chancer tried not to look too curious about the strange woman who had taken a seat behind the bar. It didn't do to make strangers in their small town feel like a fish in a goldfish bowl.
The first thought that engaged Chance's inquisitive mind was that he had never ever seen this woman before a day in his life, and there was something about her that made him instinctively guess that she wasn't American. But how he assumed this, he wasn't entirely sure, as she hasn't even opened her mouth yet. It wasn't exactly like she was wearing a huge sign on her saying, "By the way, I'm not from around here," but it was clear to him that she was not. The woman noticed Chancer at once, as he stood behind the bar smiling warmly at her, while he casually buffed up some glasses, polishing them so superbly with a cloth, so that in the late afternoon sunshine that filtered into the bar from one corner window, it made the glasses twinkle with a reflectant light, so that prisms of rainbow colours danced around the bar. The woman, who was now seated on the bar stool, not too far away from Jesse Farmington, who was a well-known rancher in these parts. He was wearing his large velvety black cowboy hat, and had the rugged, handsome looks of a cowboy whose skin had been weather-beaten by the sun from years, months, and days spent riding on the back of his horse and diligently attending to the needs of his steers. He was a man who clearly loved the outdoor lifestyle, for his demeanour was satisfied but relaxed, like someone who thoroughly enjoyed his life. Jesse ran his own ranch without a foreman. He was in his early 70s and was as fit as a fiddle, with a full head of grey hair that frolicked in flattering curls around his face. He was always clean-shaven, and smelt of the earth intermingled with an Old Spice aftershave. He looked not a day over 60, although the telltale fine feathering of lines around his eyes probably betrayed his true age. He was sitting at the bar contentedly, nursing a beer in his hands, his mind empty of any thoughts, when the woman promptly sat down, not too far away from him, and was close enough that she could have reached out to touch him if she had so wished. The woman took great pleasure in embracing the coolness of the friendly bar, with its light-hearted leisurely ambience, as if basking under the shade of a large umbrella. Walking into the bar from the outside had literally been like walking from a sauna into a cool refrigerator. It had been so hot and unpleasant out of doors, and the last time the woman had experienced heat like this was on a trip to Singapore 5 years back. The woman had begun to privately wonder if coming to this remote country town had been a good idea after all. What on earth had induced her to come out here? Many might have thought she had lost leave of her senses, and she probably had. She realized that many of the people in the bar were stealing her curious glances, but she was too fatigued to really care about that. As far as she was concerned, they could stare as much as they liked. She needed a drink to cool down, and that's all she cared about. She thought a shot of rum might just relax her withered state. She casually plonked her purse on the smooth wooden surface of the bar, and looked up at Chancer with a warm, engaging smile, intermingled with an expression of expectation on her face, as if she was surreptitiously asking him for a drink, without actually articulating the words. But Chancer immediately got the message, as he was quick on the uptake of serving the woman with his usual charm. "Howdy, ma'am. What can I get you to drink?" "I'd love a rum and coke," she said, in a crisp English accent, which took Chancer aback, as it confirmed his suspicion that this woman was not American, and he couldn't help wondering what she was doing in their small town, where visitors were few and far between, especially strangers like herself. The woman could feel the eyes of the rancher sitting a couple of bar stools away, suddenly looking at her rather curiously, after she had spoken, but when she turned around to acknowledge his presence, as would be the polite thing to do, he hurriedly looked away. It was clear he was a quiet, unassuming man, but he was definitely listening to her light-hearted conversation with Chancer. If anyone knew what was going on in the small town, Chancer Florentine, who was 25 years of age, knew the ins and outs of people's lives, as well as he knew what he'd had for breakfast that morning. As working behind a bar, you couldn't help but hear things and gather knowledge like a squirrel with its acorns for the winter. Suffice to say, people's inhibitions magically melted away like ice on a hot day, when alcohol was involved. Chancer's mother felt it was greatly inappropriate for her son to know the secrets of people's lives, but she wouldn't be complaining when he told her about the stranger in town who'd popped into the bar in the late afternoon to order a rum and coke, who was not from this part of the world by any manner of means.
"Ma'am, if you will forgive me for saying so, but you're not from around here. You've got an English accent. What are you doing in our small Wyoming town, if I may be so bold to ask you? We don't normally get exotic visitors like yourself in these parts, so you're a breath of fresh air to us. I'm sure you've noticed all the gawking looks you've been getting from some of the folk drinking here this afternoon. I apologize for that on their behalf. We're not very good at disguising our interest in strangers that pass through our neck of the woods, especially those like yourself that are from foreign waters. But believe it or not, we are friendly folk around here, and welcome newcomers gladly. So I'd like to welcome you to America, ma'am, and to our unassuming small town." "Thank you for that, young man. How very kind of you. Exotic, I hardly think so. I wouldn't describe myself as that, but it's kind of you to say so, young man," said the woman, shrugging her shoulders and letting out a musical laugh. "If you must know, I'm from a small little village in Derbyshire in England, and as to why I'm visiting your small town, I'm looking for an old friend of mine, who moved here to this town an awfully long time ago, I believe. She moved to America 54 years ago, would you believe it? I lost touch with her. We were at school together in England. She was phenomenal at sport. I was the antithesis of that, I'm afraid. While she won every sports game, I was dreadful at sports back in the day. I was always the last to be picked for any team, which was dreadfully embarrassing for me. And yet, despite being so opposite in every regard, we became the very best of friends. Inseparable we were in junior high, you know. We started writing to each other about 20 years ago, and we reconnected again. She was living in these parts at that time, and then life, you know, it got awfully busy for the both of us, I suspect, and we lost touch like you do. I'm on vacation here in America, and I wanted to visit all the hip places I've heard about, like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. I've always been told that you haven't lived unless you visited those cities, so I thought I needed to tick them off my bucket list of things you must do before you die, sort of thing. As I was in America, I thought I'd look up my old friend, but I'm not sure if she even lives in these parts anymore. I thought I'd ask around. I came here on the off chance that we might reconnect again after all these long years. She's definitely not the type to use social media platforms, I'm afraid. We're not from the savvy generation that knows how to do that kind of thing. Even my grandchildren can do things on their cell phones that are beyond my grasp. I come from a generation that doesn't do things like that. We like the old-fashioned ways to do things. So the last address I had for her was somewhere in this town, as she married a rancher and moved here. I hope I'm not grasping at straws, but I couldn't return to England before making a last-ditch effort to try and find her, even if I'm looking for a needle in a haystack, so to speak." "What's her name, ma'am? This friend of yours, I mean?" asked Chancer politely. "I know most of the locals in these parts. Pretty well, I have to say," he said, sliding a glass of rum and coke towards the woman, which she took gratefully. The glass tinkled with its ice swirling around in the dark concoction, and the woman delighted in the coldness of the drink and the cooling refreshment it offered. "Ah, that is so good," she said, taking a sip. "Oh, it's so hot out there today. Your bar is so delightfully cool, let me tell you. You're very young, young man," said the woman, studying Chancer curiously. "You must be in your 20s, I suspect. You're unlikely to know my friend. She's not from your generation. She'd be my age, about 70. Her name was Flora Ranchez. Yes, that was her married name, I believe. I know she lived in this town. Have you ever heard of her before?" Chancer looked uncomfortable at the mention of Flora Ranchez's name. His face flushed as pink as a peony. He hated to be the bearer of bad tidings. I'm very sorry to have to tell you, ma'am. Flora Ranchez died about 5 years ago from thyroid cancer. She was well loved around here and a respected member of the community. And yes, I knew her well. In truth, I had no idea she was initially from England. She had no trace of a British accent. Must have lost that a long time ago, I suspect. She was a devoted rancher's wife, but her husband Randy sold his ranch, moved to Colorado after her death, to be with close family members. Let's just say he couldn't function without her, so he's now running the old family ranch back in Colorado with his brother Warren. It seems you had a wasted trip coming out here. But if it helps, I do know Flora's body is buried at the old cemetery here. She loved the small town, you know, with all her heart, so she wanted to be buried here. You could pay her a visit at the cemetery. I'm so sorry for your loss, ma'am, and that you came all this way to be met with such bad news." "Oh, heavens, don't be sorry," said the woman, taking a tissue from her purse and dabbing her eyes. "Of course it's sad she's dead, but I knew there was always a risk she might not be around any more, as both her parents died of cancer very young. So her family has a genetic disposition to the big C, as I call it. Growing up, she used to tell me she'd never reach her 80s. She was adamant about that, you know. When you get to your 70s, some people don't stay around. Others go on to their 90s and beyond. It was a risk I knew I was taking coming here," she said, remaining stoic on hearing the news about her friend's passing. "As I said, ma'am," said Chancer, genuinely sympathetic to the woman's plight, as she had come all this way to this town for nothing. "I'm really sorry." "Well, it is what it is, isn't it? I think I'll pay my respects to her and visit the cemetery while I'm here," said the woman reflectively. "I mean, I've come all this way. It's the least I can do in the circumstances to show her she's not forgotten. I think I'll put down some flowers for her at the gravesite and then be on my way. I should have visited America sooner, to see her again. Unfortunately, I left it far too long. I've only got myself to blame for that. I intended to visit America sooner, but intentions are just that, aren't they? Intentions. It's actions that matter. But before my husband died, I didn't have as much free time available. But now I'm on my own. I have all the time in the world, but now she's gone. Isn't that so ironic? I'm very sorry about that, ma'am, that you were out of luck in reuniting with Flora Ranchez. If it makes you feel better, ma'am, she didn't have a long drawn-out illness. She was one of the lucky ones. Died a week after she was diagnosed with cancer, which is unusual. Maybe not knowing she had cancer meant she didn't believe she was ill. And you know what they say, illness can be psychosomatic. So when a doctor says you're ill, suddenly you're going to feel pretty lousy. And in my experience can go downhill fast after that. Fortunately, there was none of that for Flora Ranchez. She refused to see doctors. That was the way she was. When she visited a doctor, it was late in the day. She was complaining of feeling slightly out of sorts. So her husband Randy dragged her to the surgery while she kicked and screamed like a reluctant kid. I suspect she regretted going after receiving her bleak diagnosis. She didn't go through chemo and all that stuff. She was one of those lucky people. She had an aggressive cancer, I believe. When she discovered she had it really bad, it was too late in the day for her to do anything about it. It had metastasized throughout her entire body. She never had the struggles you usually hear about when people have cancer. She went to sleep, never woke up. One of the best ways to go, if you ask me. Even her husband Randy said she died peacefully in her sleep. Sometimes all that medical intervention prolongs the agony. Well, I'm glad to hear she didn't suffer and her end was quick, said the woman. Still, I'm sad I missed her. I really am. I was so excited about reconnecting with her again. I lost her address but remembered her hometown, which is why I came directly here, because I know in small towns people know each other. I very nearly didn't come, but I couldn't go back home without attempting to find her. I wouldn't have forgiven myself for that. I knew if I asked around, I'd find the answer, and I have. I'm sorry it's a tombstone in a cemetery that you will be visiting, ma'am. I rarely am. Would you like another rum and coke?"
"That would be lovely," said the woman. "It's thirsty work, you know, receiving bad news, and that grim hot weather out there doesn't help in the matter, let me tell you."
"We are having a heat wave of note," said Chancer, "and it's not pretty. All the animals are suffering."
"And the humans, I suspect," said the woman, taking another sip of her drink. "I've experienced heat waves in England, but this one is pretty tough going, let me tell you." Chancer returned to wiping his glasses, as the woman nursed her drink, rattling around the ice in her glass, feeling slightly melancholic about not being able to reunite with Flora Ranchez after all these years. Some things were clearly not meant to be. She probably shouldn't have come out to this remote country town after all, on a nostalgic whim like this. And who's to say Flora would have wanted to see her anyway? They'd been out of touch for long enough, and Flora had lightly moved on with her life in the way you do. But she'd always been her very best friend. And when she'd moved to America all those years ago, it had been tough to lose Flora. But life had marched on in the way it did at the speed of light, and the woman found it hard to believe that she was now in her 70s. Where had the time actually got to? It didn't feel that long ago, when she was in junior high eating cheese and tomato ketchup sandwiches on the playground with Flora.
"It's on me,"
said the quiet rancher, whose soft southern drawl broke the silence. He was sitting 2 stools away from the woman. He was waving to Chancer and pointing to the woman's rum and coke.
"Get her another one, will you, Chancer? When she's finished with that one. Put all her drinks on my tab, will you? The lady's had a nasty shock by the sounds of things." "Will do so, Jessie. Very good of you, sir," said Chancer, giving him an appreciative nod.
"Oh, that's so very kind of you," said the woman, turning around to thank Jessie. And for a moment her blue eyes met his silvery ones, and there was a flash of electricity between the two of them that the woman had not expected to experience at her time of life. I mean, she wasn't a teenager, for goodness sake. Some might describe her as an old mare ready for the knacker's yard, but she wasn't done yet. She had a whole lot of life yet to be lived still. The rancher cleared his throat.
"The name is Jessie Farmington. I'm 72 years old. I have my own ranch not far from here. I'm widowed. My wife died 5 years ago from cancer, like your friend Flora. I must express my deep commiserations for your losing your friend like this. My wife did not die of thyroid cancer. It was breast cancer in my wife's case. I'm going to be blunt here, and not beat around the bush. I'm far too old for that. I'm looking for a wife, and if you're interested, you will do very nicely. It gets lonely at the ranch without a woman by my side. Do you think you might be interested in being a rancher's wife? Or is that wild idea completely off limits to you?" he asked.
The woman was slightly taken aback by the handsome cowboy and his brazen honesty. She didn't quite know how to react to this. If he was going to engage in any light-hearted banter with her, she had not expected this. She could tell the rancher was shy by nature, polite and reserved, and for a moment she wondered if she had imagined his words. But it was clear she had not. The rancher was waiting for her. To reply, he was drawing in a deep breath, almost as if expecting to receive the brush-off. "My name is Missy Colchester," she giggled. "I'm 70 years old, turning 71 on the 29th of April next year. I'm a Taurus. I currently live in Derbyshire in England, in a rented cottage after I sold the family home, which was far too large for a single woman like myself. I'm also widowed. My husband died 3 years ago, very suddenly from a heart attack. I miss him dreadfully, so I really do understand loneliness. And I'm not sure if I'm looking for a husband. But as you put it like you do, I wouldn't say I'm not interested. I'm warming to the idea. But in truth, I've never lived on a ranch before, so I'm not certain if such a lifestyle would actually suit me or not. But I do love horses, I love nature, and I do like cows. In your case, I suspect steers is what they are. But they're much of a muchness to me, I'm most sure. So I wouldn't say that I'm not interested. Besides, Mr. Farmington, you're an incredibly handsome man, if I may be so bold to say, and I'm rather flattered by your proposal and interest in me, as it's not every day that a lady of my advancing age gets propositioned like this by a debonair, handsome cowboy like yourself. So yes, you've thrown me off my perch. But I quite like the feeling of being airborne and having my feathers all flustered. It's a thrilling feeling. I feel like a teenager all over again, shaken up I do. And I never expected this when I came to the bar this afternoon. The rancher looked at her with a twinkle in his eyes. He was amused and chuckled. You're a lovely lady, ma'am, with a good sense of humour, and I like that. I like that a lot. I'm going to be straight with you, ma'am. You won't know if you like living on a ranch until you've experienced it. So you need to stay on one first. Why don't you stay on my ranch in a spare room and see if it floats your boat? You can get to know me better. And if you like me and the ranch together, we can fly over to Vegas and make it official. Get married. What do you say? Are you being serious, Mr. Farmington? Asked the woman, studying him closely, as if looking for any signs that the man was teasing her. The rancher, who'd removed his black cowboy hat from his head by now, was twisting it playfully in his hand, and was looking at her earnestly. Of course I'm being serious, ma'am. The name's Jessie, by the way. I never play games. What you see with me is what you get. I'm an all-or-nothing sort of guy. I'm Sagittarius. I believe it's a fire sign, and there are no half measures with me. We know what we want, and we go for it. Dare I say my late wife was also Taurus like you are. Born on the 10th of May, she was. There is something about you that rather reminds me about her, although I'm not sure it has anything to do with the star sign. But maybe it does. Who knows? He paused for a brief moment and continued. You said yourself, ma'am, you were passing through Wyoming. In the morning you will be gone. I think you're lovely. I love the way you speak and the way you carry and conduct yourself. I can always tell good stock and breeding when I see it, from my steers to my horses, and even my dogs, and I'm never ever wrong. If I let you go, I would be a foolish man indeed. I remember once going to an auction. I missed buying the most superb horse I've ever seen in my entire life. She was a beauty, she was. I took too long to put my hand up. Someone else got there first, and the auctioneer had closed the sale before I had a chance to protest and to put down my bid. I could have kicked myself for being so slack on the uptake. I always regretted that late decision, and made my mind up from thenceforth that I would never ever be slow on the uptake again. So that's why I've proposed to you right now. I can't let a good thing like yourself slip through my fingers like butter. That would be a bad idea. So let me get this right, Jessie. Are you looking at me like one of your livestock? Said Missy teasingly, raising a questionable eyebrow. No, of course I'm not, ma'am. What I'm saying is I know a good thing when I see it, and I'm not going to let it pass me by. I'm in my 70s now. I refuse to look a gift horse in the mouth. May I call you Missy? But of course you can call me Missy. It would be rather odd, don't you think, if you called me by my last name, if you were intent on marrying me, she teased. And I am intent on marrying you, Missy. I think you and I would be good together. So how about it? We can pick up your stuff from where you were staying. You can cancel your flights back to England and move in with me. If it doesn't work out, I'll buy you a ticket back to the UK myself. Can't say fairer than that, can I? I'm a gentleman, so we can take things at your pace.
very slowly if need be. What I'm really looking for is a companion, a close female friend. It gets terribly lonely back at my ranch, returning home to an empty ranch. I miss the fact that everything is soulless and empty, without the presence of a woman around.
I'm staying at a B&B around here, said Missy, looking bemused. You want me to move in with you right away? Is that what you're saying? Are you sure about this? Isn't this a little bit fast?
Of course it's fast. I wouldn't run an efficient ranch if I didn't make my mind up quickly about things. The moment you sat next to me in the bar and ordered your rum and coke, I knew I liked you at once, and my instincts have never failed me yet. That is why I'm good at what I do. I run one of the most successful ranches in these parts, and I say that without wishing to appear immodest. It is what it is. He speaks the truth, ma'am. He's not blowing his trumpet, said Chancer, stepping forward and interceding in the conversation rather abruptly. Jesse here, I've known him all my life. He owns one of the finest ranches in these parts, and a more honourable man you can't find. If you marry him, ma'am, you're a lucky lady indeed. He'll treat you fine. His late wife was very happy, loved the bones of Jessie, she did. I know I'm sounding like a dating app, and I don't mean to, but I think you two would be good together. The rancher meets the English rose, he teased. I think it will work out fine. So go on, say it. You're getting hitched, he said, pointing a finger from Missy to Jessie, unable to disguise the enthusiasm on his face. Maybe he was a romantic after all, yet he tirelessly teased his own mother for her obsession with romantic fiction. That's right, the two of us are getting married shortly, said Jessie, with such conviction and self-assurance in his voice that even Missy was thrown by his presumptuousness. She incongruously found it rather attractive. Indeed, Jessie was so assured that they were getting married that she started to believe it herself. She had always loved men who knew what they wanted from life. Jessie's resolute decisiveness thrilled Missy. She had never met anyone like Jessie Farmington before in her life. She had always been drawn to cowboys from when she was a little girl, watching those Western movies on television, where she clandestinely rather fancied herself as the wife of a handsomely rugged cowboy. In her wild, far-flung, wistful fantasies, of course. But not even for a second did she ever think that such fanciful daydreaming that she had engaged in from her past would one day become fully realized. And yet now, in this Wyoming bar, in a matter of minutes, she had come a hair's breadth away from becoming a rancher's wife, and she had a prognostic feeling that Jessie Farmington would not disappoint. There was unquestionably a spark between Jessie and herself, but would it actually work? Her staying in America and settling down on a ranch like this with a rancher? I mean, stranger things had happened, and for some reason she decided she didn't have anything to lose. After her husband Michael had died, life had become incredibly lonely for her back in England. There were days she would retire to bed feeling as if she was adrift on the ocean, waiting for a ship to come and rescue her from her sorry, sequestered life. She did feel as if she was lost at sea, estranged from the life that she had known and loved. There were times, even in social situations, around a lot of people, where she engaged with friends, that she felt loneliest of all in their company, returning home to an empty house, to a cold bed, that she felt even more aware she had no one with her to share her life with. She had been very blessed and privileged to enjoy a good life in England, but had never been tempted to do something outrageously off the cuff and daredevil that involved a great deal of risk, and marrying a perfect stranger was like playing a wild card, and it appealed to her in ways that she could not explain. "Let's do it," said Missy, taking the rancher's hand and giving it a tight squeeze. He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed it, holding her gaze, his lips twitching with amusement. "Missy Farmington," he said, already finishing her name with his surname, "you make me a very happy man indeed, And to think that I thought it was going to be a routinely mediocre day at the bar. How wrong I was about that. I cannot believe that you've accepted my proposal."
"Well, I aim to please," said Missy, giving Jessie a cheeky wink.
"Oh, my goodness, this is amazing,"
said Chancer, standing behind the bar ebulliently, looking as pleased as Punch.
"To think I thought this was going to be a regular day at work. Wait until I tell my mother about this. She's the perennial romantic, she is. You should see our bookcases at home, bursting at the seams with romantic novels. But this love story blows all the ones she reads right out of the window. You can't make the stuff up, can you? Wait until I tell her about this. She'll be having kittens, but in a good way, of course. I'm going to give you both some champagne on the house. You deserve this. But I won't be shouting your good news out to the patrons, Jessie. I know that you're very private, and you don't like people knowing your own business, so I'll keep this to myself." "I appreciate that very much, Chancer," said Jessie. "You're a good lad, you are. Some champagne would be lovely for this cause for a celebration indeed, and I'd like you to join us on that, Chancer, since you're privy to our exciting news. But I'll be paying for the champagne, and I want the finest French champagne that you have in the bar, because we need to celebrate."
2 weeks later, there was a long, uncomfortable, awkward pause at the end of the phone, and finally Missy's 54-year-old son Andrew spoke.
"You are kidding me, Mum. You did what?"
"You heard me, son. I saw the sights. I visited San Francisco. Lovely city it is, too. Fascinating. I visited Los Angeles and New York. And I went to visit my friend in Wyoming. Sadly, she died. But I got married." She giggled like a teenager. "Me and Jessie Farmington tied the knot together in Las Vegas. We married at a place called the Chapel of Flowers. We stayed at the Bellagio. Oh, what an incredible place it was. Stunningly beautiful, so luxurious. We had such a wonderful, romantic time."
"Mum, you are 70 years old. Is this some kind of a warped, sick joke? Because if it is, I fail to find it remotely amusing. I thought you went to America to see the sights and to look up that friend of yours. Certainly not to get bloody married. You're not a whimsically naive teenager, for God's sake."
"Sweetheart, please mind your bad language, will you? You're speaking to your mother. You know better than to speak like that. If you must know, I met a stranger in a bar. We decided to tie the knot. I sat down to enjoy a rum and coke, and he asked me to marry him. And you know what? I thought to myself, why not? What have I got to lose? Besides, I rather fancied myself as a rancher's wife, and he's the quintessential cowboy, terribly handsome. I couldn't resist accepting his proposal." She giggled again.
"Mum, are you delusional or something? Who does that? Are you insane? You don't even know this man."
"But don't you see, sweetheart? I'm getting to know him. He is a wonderful man, quite the charmer, such an incredible gentleman. We're both falling for each other hard, you know. I think I love him. I really do. I know it's early days, but we both feel the same way about each other. It was serendipitous, like we've known each other all our lives."
"Mum, what language are you speaking? It's clearly not English. How long have you known him for?"
"Well, sweetheart, it's only been about 2 weeks. As I was telling you, he's a rancher. I moved on to his ranch 2 weeks ago, and then into his bedroom a week ago. We flew to Vegas to get married, and I've never been happier. He's a wonderful man, son, as I keep telling you. He's got a lovely American drawl. He's handsome, he's a cowboy, and he's all man."
"Mum, you're talking to your son here. You're making me physically cringe with such descriptions. They're far too graphic for my liking. You're talking like a silly, fanciful teenager. with hormones raging all over the place like the firecrackers on the 4th of July. But you're behaving like one too. For your information, I don't want to know the intimate details of your love life. I've got to eat, and my food isn't going to digest well, thinking of you shacked up with someone like this. You barely know the man, Mum. You're normally so sensibly prudent, so reliable. You play things safe in life. Why would you marry a random stranger like this? You're a 71-year-old woman, Mum. 70 going on 71. Hasn't your life experience taught you anything about being cautious and careful when you make life-changing decisions like this? It's taught me, son, that sometimes it's worth taking a risk. I've done things safe all my life, and it's made my life rather dull and boring, if you must know. It's time for a change, and it's never too late for one. Mum, this isn't like throwing a gamble on the horses. This is your life we're talking about. Whereabouts is this ranch of his? His name is Jesse, son. The ranch is in Wyoming. A beautiful ranch it is, too. Ponds, trees, creeks, mountainous valleys, lots of trees, vast open spaces, you name it. It's really spectacular, very peaceful out here. And Jesse, as I keep telling you, is a lovely man. You would really like him. I know you would. I think if you met him, you would approve. Mum, Wyoming is in the sticks. Even I know that, despite the fact I've only been to New York and Los Angeles. But I know enough. As far as I know, it's in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sorry, but you don't know this man. You can't know him in 2 weeks. I can't believe you've done something so impulsively like this. What were you thinking? But I feel like I've known Jesse for a lifetime, son. Isn't that enough? And I do believe I'm falling for him hard. There was once again a long, awkward pause at the end of the phone. Mum, this is crazy. Have you thought about what you've done? What about me and Andrea? We are your children. Don't you care at all about us? Then there's your grandchildren. You've abandoned us all, living at the other end of the world like this. It's an incredibly selfish and self-centered thing to do. I'm sorry, but it is. And I'm going to say it, even if it's a kick in the guts for you to hear. Someone needs to knock some sense into you. Sweetheart, I love you and your sister Andrea very much. And my grandchildren, of course, very dearly. But my grandchildren are no longer kids. They've grown up themselves. They have their own busy lives to lead. I see them less than I see you and Andrea. I'm not complaining, of course. I appreciate that you've all got incredibly busy lives and that you're very preoccupied. Even when I lived in Derbyshire, I was incredibly lucky if I got to see you once a year. It's been terribly lonely for me without your father around. I've missed the bones of him. You know, and now that my dog is also passed away, it really hurts being on my own. He made your father's death more bearable, but Kibble's gone now. The cottage I've been renting has felt like a morgue. Very depressing it's been. You have your busy lives to lead, and I have mine. And I've met someone that I really care about a great deal. Are you not happy for me? Doesn't your old mum deserve some happiness in the winter of her life? You and the grandkids are welcome to visit us in Wyoming. The ranch is huge. There's a lot of space for the all of you. It's a wonderful excuse to come out here on holiday, and it would be lovely to have you here to stay. Happy? Of course I'm not happy, Mum. You've made a catastrophic mistake, and right now I am so bitterly disappointed in you. I cannot speak to you. I feel grievously let down by you. How could you do this to us? You're now on the other side of the world. It's like you've abandoned us. I certainly don't want to visit some dump in the middle of nowhere. Me and the wife, we like to go to civilized places. And if we go to America, it will be to places like San Francisco, Boston, and New York. not a tiny, remote, rural American town in the sticks. That's about as interesting as watching paint dry. You'll be glad to know Andrea's here. She's with me right now. She's popped over for a visit. She wants to speak to you. I hope she'll talk some sense into you. You need to annul this preposterous marriage of yours. Get a quickie divorce and come back home.
Mum! It's Andrea speaking! Oh, my word! I can't believe it! Is it true? This is amazing! You've met someone in America! Oh, I'm so thrilled for you! Tell me all about him! Where did you meet him? I met him in a bar in Wyoming, wouldn't you believe? He's a rancher, a true American cowboy, handsome and charming, with a very pleasing southern drawl. He saw me in the bar and proposed to me 2 minutes later, I believe it was. You've got to be kidding me! You see a handsome cowboy in a bar, and 2 minutes later he proposes to you, and you accept? Is this for real, or is this a joke? It's for real, said Missy, beginning to giggle. I mean, there was a spark between us from the very beginning, of course. I mean, you don't ask a stranger you're not attracted to marry you. So there was an attraction between us. I thought he was terribly handsome. He thought I was lovely. And you know what? I thought, what the hell? Why not blow all caution to the wind and do something wildly outrageous for a change? And if it doesn't work, I could return to England, glad that I was not left wondering if refusing Jessie had been a mistake. I love it here on the ranch with him. Jessie is an incredible man with such a generously warm heart and a fabulous sense of humour. He's always making me laugh, and I've never been happier. For the first time in a long time, it feels so good to be alive. But your brother is making me feel dreadfully guilty about what I've done. But I have to say, sweetheart, I don't regret my decision at all, not even a tiny bit. It feels right, what I've done. Ma'am, don't apologise to me. This is the best news ever, and don't listen to Andrew. He hasn't got a romantic bone in his body. I'm sorry he's not happy for you, but, Mum, I am. When Dad died, I worried sick about you being on your own like that. I'm so glad you've met someone, Mum. I can't wait to have an excuse to come over to America to see you there in Wyoming, on a ranch of all things. I can imagine you would love it there, because you've always adored nature and love animals. Besides, you're an amazing cook and love pottering around the kitchen like a domestic goddess. It sounds like you found for yourself a keeper, and I think you were made to be a rancher's wife, because at heart you were never really a city girl, were you? No, I wasn't. When Missy put down the telephone, Jessie folded his arms lovingly around his wife, kissing her gently on her cheek. Missy had put the phone on speaker so Jessie could hear her conversation with her children. She wanted no secrets from him, and Jessie appreciated her open heart. He gave her a wink and made her smile. I can tell there were mixed emotions there, especially with your son Andrew, about us getting together. But sons are very protective towards their mothers, so you can't blame him for reacting like that. Your daughter seems genuinely pleased for the both of us, and that's a promising start. You can never, of course, predict how your own children are going to react to news like this. But don't be too hard on Andrew. You are now living considerably further away from him, and it's not easy for him to digest. There was always a chance that he was bound to react adversely like this. But given time, I'm sure he'll come around to the news. Well, I suppose I didn't expect him to react any other way. You could tell he was absolutely furious with me. But my daughter surprised me. She's always been a romantic, but she was genuinely thrilled for me. But my son thinks I'm as mad as a hatter to impulsively marry a stranger like this. Correction, said Jessie. I was a stranger 2 weeks ago, but I'm not any more.
You've made me a very happy man, Missy Farmington. I told you I knew a good thing when I saw it. The ranch has blossomed, come to life with you around. The dogs love you, so does George the cat, and he's very particular about who he likes. A discerning character he is.
I still can't get over your boldness, said Missy, giggling. You brazenly asking me to outright marry you like that. And I can't believe I actually said yes. But you know what, Jessie Farmington? Marrying you was the very best decision of my life, if the last 2 weeks are anything to go by.
Well, when you came into the bar and ordered your rum and coke, and I heard you say you were passing through, I couldn't possibly let you go, could I? It seemed asking you to marry me was a sure way of keeping you here.
You are a very naughty man, Jessie, but I wouldn't have you any other way. But I will remind you, we've still got one more storm we need to weather, and that's your adult children. The question is, how are they going to react to me when they visit us next weekend? I'm awfully nervous about it, I have to tell you.
I'm not exactly sure how they're going to react, Jessie admitted. I think my son Wagner ain't going to take the news terribly well. And as for my daughter Kathy, well, I'm not sure how she's going to take it. It could go both ways. But do you know what, Missy? These are our lives, and the choices we make have nothing to do with our children. If they don't like the decisions we make, well, that's their problem, not ours. Half the time my son Wagner used to date the most unsuitable woman at one point, but never once did I put my butt into his business, as I let him make his own life choices, his own monumental mistakes. You cannot control your grown-up kids, any more than they can control us.
Even so, said Missy, looking concerned, I would like your kids to like me. Have you told them anything about me, or are you still keeping stum?
No, I haven't told them a thing about you. I invited them to lunch next weekend. Told them I had something to tell them, and someone I wanted them to meet. I'm not sure if they suspect anything.
Well, you're saying that you want them to meet someone. Might raise questions with them. You don't think you should warn them first about me, do you? My presence might come as a shock to them. They might think you've replaced their mother, and that can be very hurtful for children, you know. It doesn't matter what age they are.
I think it's best not to reveal too much to them now. They need to meet you before they jump to wild conclusions. If they meet you, they might understand why I popped the question to you so quickly. And if they don't, well, it's tough, isn't it? They know I love their mother very much, but they also know how desperately lonely I've been without her. I can only hope they will be happy for me. And if they're not, that's their problem.
I'm not sure they'll understand, Jessie, said Missy. Children, as I keep saying to you, it doesn't matter what age they are. They're always your children, and they have a tendency to be rather difficult and capriciously belligerent at times. I'm lucky Andrea is so agreeable about all this. But I know Andrew thinks I've lost my mind. It's going to take a lot to persuade him that I've made a good choice in marrying you. But hopefully we'll get there in the end. 1 week later, Missy woke up early on a Saturday morning, after a restless, rather uncomfortable night's sleep. Even though the temperatures in the bedroom were pretty close to perfect, thanks to a very good air conditioning system, she was naturally rather nervous about the luncheon she was hosting for Jessie's adult children and his grandkids later that morning. Wagner's children were in their early 20s, but thankfully they would not be attending the lunch that day. Jessie's daughter Kathy, on the other hand, and her children would be coming. Her kids were between the ages of 5 and 7. She was coming to lunch without her husband, as he was working. Missy was worried about how Jessie's adult children would react to her once Jessie introduced her to them. What if they didn't like her? I mean, they might consider her an outsider. Jessie's side of the bed felt cold, when Missy reached out to touch it, which meant he'd been out of bed for quite some time. He fastidiously woke up before the dawn broke, to dutifully attend to the horses and steers on his ranch, which he ran so seamlessly smoothly, probably better than someone half his age. He was strong, fit, and patiently long-suffering, as any man was in his 30s. Missy had got used to his side of the bed being empty, but at night when they cuddled up to each other close, it was so good to have his reassuring strong arms around her body, cocooning her from the lonely life she had endured for far too long. It had been amazing to find how well suited that she and Jessie were from the very beginning, and it felt as if they'd never been apart. But she could not explain that to her son Andrew, who had rigidly stuffy opinions about how the world worked and what you did and did not do. If she told him exactly how she felt, he would likely take it the wrong way and claim that she had obviously not really loved their father enough, if she dared to feel so tenderly towards another man. Jessie was practically finishing her sentences, and as irrational as it sounded, she felt as if she'd always belonged on this ranch, with the steers and the horses and the dogs. One of Jessie's golden retrievers, Mr. Spicer, had adopted Missy as his new best friend, while the two Labrador mixes, Cloud and Winger, were completely devoted to Jessie, and where he went, so did they. But all three dogs were lightly out with him this morning, following him around dutifully, embracing the fresh air with their usual rambunctious ebullience, as these dogs seemed to have forgotten that they were no longer puppies. Missy smiled contentedly to herself when she felt the familiar lump at the end of the bed, and knew it was George, the 8-year-old ginger tabby, that Jessie claimed had presumptuously parked himself on the front doorstep one day, and pompously invited himself to move in, and that had been that.
It was like he said, "Well, aren't you going to make way for me? Aren't you going to let me in? Or do I have to sit out here all day and wait?" Jessie had told her. And when he moved in, he thought he owned the place and owned us. And nothing has changed in that regard, let me tell you. Even the dogs look up to good old George, as if he calls all the shots around here. And believe me, he does.
George was now blissfully curled up at the bottom of the bed, with his legs happily outstretched. Missy reached out to stroke him lovingly, and he began to purr like a miniature steam engine.
"You're a lovely cat, George, aren't you?" she told him, scratching the area under his chin, which he loved. "Normally I enjoy being lazy with you," she told the cat, "and I would gladly sleep in with you. But I'm very nervous this morning, I'm afraid. I'm going to have to take a walk on the ranch to calm down my angst. Today's the day, George, when I meet Jessie's family, and I'm afraid I'm not taking it too well. As you can see, I'm shaking in my boots."
George looked up at her with a rather you than me type of look on his face, watching Missy with wide yellow eyes, as she sashayed over to the walk-in closet to retrieve a pair of trousers and a sweater. Missy had always fancied walking through the grove of trees that fringed a large silvery pond on the right-hand side of the ranch. But with the soaring temperatures that they had been experiencing of late, Jessie had wisely warned her that if she wanted to take a comfortable walk on the ranch, it was better to get up early in the morning, and Missy had not conquered the masterful art of early rising until now. It was the unsettling thoughts of meeting Jessie's adult children that had thrown her out of bed, like being flung out of your car seat into the windscreen during a collision. It was a daunting feeling, thinking about meeting Jessie's grown-up children. She dreaded seeing how they might react to her. The previous day she'd been making homemade ice creams, potato salads, and all kinds of delicious sumptuous treats for Jessie's family to enjoy. But now in a few hours they would be here. She could not contain her anxiety. Jessie had been trying to reassure her that everything would be fine, but she was not sure that it would be. If her son Andrew's reaction was anything to go by, she had very low expectations about how the day would finally pan out. In order to get to the woodgrove on Jessie's ranch, Missy would have to walk across a couple of open meadows, and on a hot summer scorching day, that walk could be punishingly cruel, which was why early rising was not half such a bad idea. Jessie was used to the dry, hot temperatures of a Wyoming summer, but for her, frolicking around outdoors in the heat wave was something she would do well to avoid. She walked over to the curtain and pulled it back across the rails, to peer outside at the sprawling countryside that stretched out before her like an all-encompassing yawn. In the distance she could see the signature of the mountains, as they seized the sky with their powerful assertive dominance, their voluptuous hilly contours clouded in early morning mist, while the morning sky was stained in gasps of orange and gold that announced that the sun was rising, as soft injections of pretty morning light bathed the countryside in a shimmering glaze. Even though the grass was so yellow and rather tired-looking, under the subdued light of the early morning, it looked rather fetching in this arboreal paradise that Jessie told her was over 6,000 feet above sea level, which was quite a staggering thought when you actually stopped to think about it. The clusters of trees fringed the bottom of the mountains, in viridescent clusters. They cast their lofty reflections across the silvery pond, so the landscape was mirrored back at her like a world within a world. Missy felt as if the day was reaching out to her and surreptitiously coaxing her to explore the countryside, and something inside her felt the need to respond to its call, like an itch that she badly needed to scratch. "Don't worry," Missy told the cat. "I'm keeping the curtains closed for you so as not to disturb your restful slumber." Whether the cat was grateful or not for such loving considerations, she did not know. But George remained stoically curled up on the bed, looking ever so slightly disappointed to be deserted by his sleeping companion, whom he'd grown quite fond of over the last 2 weeks, as Missy knew how to give a cat the very best kind of scratches. Missy walked from her bedroom, down the long passageway to the kitchen, and then exited through the back door, but she left a note on the chalkboard that hung over the wall for reminders, such as groceries or things that needed doing. It probably wasn't necessary to leave Jessie a note, but she did so anyway, because it was the polite thing to do. "Gone for a walk in the grove, took your advice and got up early. I will be back very soon," she wrote. As Missy opened the door of the kitchen, which was always left unlocked during the day, the cool gasps of morning air were soothing and refreshing. She appreciated how spectacularly beautiful it was to be up this early in the morning, and wished she did this more often. She could see the distant figure of Jessie on horseback, galloping alongside a large herd of steers, with 3 dogs at his side. But she didn't wave at him, for he would not have seen her. But she smiled to herself because Jessie was without doubt the quintessential cowboy, who was now her husband, and this revelation she was still getting used to. Missy grazed the rocky ground beneath her walking boots that Jessie had kindly bought for her. She ambled through 2 sprawling fields, towards the twisted, gnarled-looking bark pine trees that had been recklessly abused by the vast swings in the Wyoming weather, from bone-dry summers, hurricane-force winds, to the cruel lashes of snow and ice that the winter months harvested. Ostensibly these 60-foot monster trees had been unkindly assaulted by hard batterings from the unscrupulous elements that knew no mercy, so consequently were a little twisted in their shapes, but Missy found them sculpturally beautiful. Some of them reminded her of old men leaning over from a great height to examine their toes. The grove invited a mix of quaking aspens, cottonwoods, mountain junipers, Douglas firs, green ashes, ponderosa pines, and there was a vast collection of bur oaks in the grove that Jessie claimed were close to being 300 years old, and some of them were absolutely magnificent to behold. Jessie had assured Missy that the acorns they offered provided a high-calorie diet for squirrels, deer, rabbits, and turkeys alike. As Missy entered the trees, the grove was cool and quite dark, as only whispers of sneaky light mischievously peeked through the boughs. The forest floor was rocky and tumultuous, with pitted crevices and dips, but it was a lot more richer in quality than the ground in the meadow, which had a low nutrient density. But with fallen leaves and the woodland oasis, Missy suspected the woodgrove was much more fertile. She ambled through rugged-looking briars and burrs, low-lying shrubs, patches of grass and flowery shrubs. The forest was resplendently furnished, with occasional fallen logs, some covered in moss and lichen, and then there were pronounced tree roots that bludgeoned their way through the dry soil unapologetically. Missy enjoyed her invigorating walk. Soon she forgot about the tumultuous challenges that the day presented, as she drank in the syrupy beauty of the morning. She could hear the birds tweeting high up in the branches of the trees, and laughed out loud when she scared the bejesus out of some wild turkey, who were not remotely amused by her unwelcome presence, and made quite a squawking commotion as they hurriedly scuttled away as fast as they possibly could. Suffice to say, a couple of those turkeys were so big, Missy could almost imagine how great they would be for Thanksgiving dinner, served with roast potatoes, vegetables and gravy. It was after she had been walking for quite a while. She sensed she was not alone. The first thing that came to her mind was that Jessie had come to look for her in the woods, and decided to involuntarily join her for a walk. But then the dogs would have bounded through the trees first to greet her, long before Jessie. But there was no sign of him anywhere. But why did she feel so certain that she was not alone? She could perceive that she was being watched, and even drove her gaze right up into the branches of the trees to see if she could see something or someone hiding in plain sight. But nothing was there. The profound feeling that she was not alone did not abate. There was a slight morning breeze blowing, and a few leaves rustling on the branches of the trees, along with the pretty trill of the bird-song. But beyond that, it was ominously quiet, almost too quiet. "Silly me," she told herself. "What am I like? No one is watching me. Honestly, I've never been in a woodgrove before. Of course my imagination is playing tricks on me. That's what it's got to be." As she walked forward down the trail, she could hear the popping of twigs, as if someone with a heavy, sizable footfall was creeping surreptitiously behind her. She abruptly turned around very swiftly, to look over her shoulders, to scrutinize the area between the trees. But still no one was there. "Hello! Hello!" she called out. "Is anybody there? Jessie? Is that you? Jessie? Is that you? Because if this is some kind of joke, I'm not laughing." But once again she was met by a pretentiously stony silence. But even so she began to feel awfully silly, deciding that her nerves about the day that lay ahead of her had made her unusually skittish. She stopped dead in her tracks for a moment, when she heard the ominous footfall again. Someone was definitely following her. This nauseating revelation made her head spin. Her heart performed cartwheels in her chest, as prickles of fear trickled down her spine. Her heart began to move very fast. Her breathing became fast and furious. She needed to leave the grove right now. She needed to get out of here straight away. But she couldn't move. She felt distinctly uneasy and on edge, but it was like she had frozen to the spot, like a terrified mouse. Something coughed. She glanced up to see an 8 to 9 foot giant standing before her, covered in hair, with a human-looking face and overlong arms that were outstretched towards her, holding out her dark glasses for her to take from him, that had obviously slipped out of her fingers and must have landed on the ground. And this thing, whatever in the hell it was nonchalantly handing them over to her, as if she'd stumbled across him in a supermarket car park, and they were extending polite pleasantries together. Missy was wondering if she was seeing right. She couldn't be. Was her vision distorted? She had to be dreaming. That was it. She was still in bed with George at her feet, experiencing a weird, lucid, vivid nightmare of some kind. But But it dawned on her that she was really seeing this thing, and she began to panic. This huge creature, with its bullet-shaped head, was the scariest thing she had ever beheld in her entire life. Indeed, it was so monumental in size, she felt as fragile as a china doll in its presence. As the creature stepped forward to hand her glasses, Missy was so filled with abject terror that she found herself paling and becoming very light-headed. And then she completely blacked out. Missy suddenly came to, when Jessie began to shake her violently, and there were dogs jumping all over her, all three of them, nuzzling her with wet kisses.
"What are you doing sitting on the back doorstep of the kitchen?" asked Jessie, looking stunned. "You look as if you're half asleep."
"How did I get here?" asked Missy, looking dumbfounded.
"Well, that's the question I was about to ask you," asked Jessie. "You look as if you were passed out there. Are you sure you're all right?" He frowned. "Oh, my goodness. You're panicking, aren't you, about the lunch today? About meeting my children? Is that what this is all about? Don't let it get to you, Missy. Everything's going to be all right."
Missy nodded, and Jessie threw his arm over her affectionately, embracing her in a huge big hug. She didn't know what to tell him. She'd just been in the woodgrove, had seen an outlandish creature who'd been handing her dark glasses back to her. She must have blacked out. But how did she wake up on the kitchen step, and had no memory of how she actually got there from the woodgrove, across 2 fields, all the way to the kitchen step? Was she losing her mind? But she remembered the creature so vividly. Why had she been so afraid of it, as it was so human-looking, and had been kind towards her? But it had been monstrously huge, so intimidating. She had never seen anything like that before in her entire life.
"What are your dark glasses doing over here?" said Jessie, picking them up and handing them back to Missy. They had been balanced rather precariously on the kitchen sill, on top of a magnificent eagle's feather. "Where did you find this feather?" he asked her, examining it curiously. "This is some beauty. An eagle's feather it is. Where did you find it?"
"Well, I went for a walk in the woodgrove," she told Jessie, but could not bring herself to tell him her strange, rather incredulous story. Because how on earth do you explain something so bizarre that happened to you, when you don't exactly understand it yourself, and almost wonder if it was all just some incredible nonsensical dream? She took the large feather from Jessie's hand and brushed it with her fingers. She knew at once the feather had been left for her by the human-looking hairy creature that she'd encountered. Had he carried her all the way back to the farmhouse after she'd passed out? It was the only thing that made any sense to her. It was at about 10 to 12 exactly when Wagner finally arrived at the ranch with his wife Katina, when his heavy Land Rover Discovery rolled down the driveway and rattled on its approach, and then squatted into a parked position. Jessie's 3 dogs had raced out of the house like rockets, with tails wagging ebulliently, as they were incredibly excited to meet their guests that they knew very well. Missy's heart almost missed a beat. She froze to the spot like a waxwork statue at Madame Tussaud's, as she heard the car door slam, the murmur of voices, and the sound of leather boots battering against the ground as they made their way to the front door, which creaked wide open and then slammed behind itself. Wagner and his wife had arrived, and Missy jumped into action and began quickly bustling around the kitchen, preparing lunch, her heart pounding as she heard Jessie's voice getting closer and closer and closer, and another voice that must have belonged to Jessie's son Wagner.
"What is all this about, Dad?" she heard him say. "You sounded rather excited. You said you wanted us to meet someone. You've got us rather intrigued. Follow me, son. All will be revealed in due course," he said, guiding his son and his wife Katina into the kitchen. Missy stood there with a tray of warm bread rolls in her hand,
which she very nearly dropped as Wagner and his wife were brought into the kitchen. Jessie moved over to Missy's side and put his strong arm around her.
"Son, I'd like you to meet Missy. Missy, this is my son Wagner and his wife Katina. Missy here, son, is my wife."
For a long moment there was an awkward silence in the kitchen. You could have almost heard a pin drop. Missy could see Wagner had inherited his father's steely grey eyes and curly grey hair, and he stared at Missy for a moment with an expression of abject confoundment on his face, as if he'd been thrown into an alternative universe and was trying to make sense of his new bearings. He stared at Missy agog, like a gog-eyed goldfish, which would have been rude if it had not been obvious that he was completely caught off guard. It was clear it had never so much as crossed his mind that his father would ever get remarried, and had been thrown off his perch in bewilderment as he digested this astonishing news. It was Katina, his wife, who stepped forward to embrace both Jessie and Missy in a warm, effusive hug, tears filling her eyes. She said,
"Oh, I'm so happy for the both of you! Congratulations! Look at me, I'm in shock. My heart is pounding violently in my chest. I guess Wagner and I just didn't expect this at all. We're rather taken aback, but in a good way, of course."
Katina had short, funky brown hair, eyes the colour of warm chocolate with pretty golden flecks, and a cute pixie face, made all the more endearing by the dimples on either side of her cheeks.
"It's a pleasure to meet you, Missy,"
she said, sounding genuinely sincere.
"Welcome to the family. For goodness sake, Wagner, get a grip," she told him, nudging her husband. "Isn't this great news, Wagner? Your dad has got married to this lovely lady here. I hope you're pleased for him. I always worried about your father being alone on the ranch like this, but now he's in very good company."
"When did this happen, Dad?"
asked Wagner rather stiffly, his body becoming rigidly upright and straight, his face as white as a piece of chalk.
"When did you decide to get married? It might have been nice to have actually been cordially invited to your wedding. Or didn't you even consider us when you decided to march down the aisle? Don't be like that, son. At my age, we don't have huge wedding celebrations. It was a private celebration between the two of us. Me and Missy, we flew to Vegas and stayed at the Bellagio. It was really lovely. We met 2 weeks ago at a bar in town. Missy is not from around here. She's been visiting Wyoming, looking for an old friend of hers. She's from a little village in Derbyshire in England. I knew if I didn't pop the question to her, then and there I would never ever see her again. And when she accepted me, I couldn't believe my luck. I am very fortunate that this beautiful English rose here agreed to marry an old rancher like myself, and is willing to put up with my less than conventional lifestyle. So yes, we got married in Vegas."
Wagner frowned.
"You asked this woman to marry you at a bar in town, yet you knew nothing at all about her." "I knew enough, son, to know a good thing when I saw it, and Missy has made me very happy indeed. I have not felt this contented in a long time, and the two of us have clicked. I feel as if I've known Missy here all my life. She fits seamlessly and perfectly into my life, and I can't remember having laughed as much as I am doing so now, as Missy has got a great sense of humour."
Wagner ran his hand through his straggly grey curls and looked at Missy apologetically, although he never said anything, for a few minutes. Finally he extended his hands to shake Missy's.
"I'm sorry about that, and I'm sorry if I appear incredibly rude. It is genuinely good to meet you, Missy. You must forgive me for being so—"
"Shocked," said Missy, completing his sentence for him.
"I know it's shocking," she told Wagner. "I wouldn't have expected you to react in any other way, Wagner. I'm even shocked I accepted your father's proposal as well, if you must know. I've never done anything so outrageous before, as irrational as it sounds, but it did feel right. Your father and I, we connected at once. It's hard to explain, and I don't expect you to understand at all. But I don't regret marrying your father for a moment. It was the best decision I've ever made in my entire life, and I'm happy to be here on the ranch with him. I love the natural world very much. I love horses and cows and walks in the wood grove, so I couldn't be happier. Although the weather is less than to be desired at the moment, this heat wave is driving me insane. But other than that, I couldn't be happier.
You mean you love steers, corrected Wagner, unable to suppress the twitch of amusement on his face.
I'm afraid they wouldn't appreciate being called cows.
He liked Missy at once, and could see why his father had been drawn to her. But still, was it not crazy to marry someone you'd only just met? But he could see his father looked incredibly happy, and it was a long time since he had seen his dad looking like this. His father deserved happiness, of course he did, but it was difficult to see his father with anyone else, when he'd only been with their mother.
My God, said Katina. Talk about romantic.
She threw her hands over her mouth in astonishment, after having listened to Jessie's incredible account on how he'd met Missy.
So you're from England, Missy? Then you meet my father-in-law in a bar, and you accept his proposal for marriage. Wow, it's so romantic. But I'm not going to lie, I certainly didn't expect anything like this to happen. But I can see you're a lovely lady, Missy, and if you make my father-in-law happy, who am I to complain? Let's just say Jessie is an incredibly good man. He deserves some happiness in his life. It was hard for him when his wife died. And in truth, I haven't seen Jessie look this happy in a long time. You brought life back into this ranch, Missy. But don't you feel a bit like a fish out of water, if you don't mind me asking? I don't know how you're coping with this dry heat. I mean, you're from England, aren't you? And this ranch is out in the sticks. Do you really think a life like this on a ranch is suitable for you? I mean, it must be a far cry from the life you've known. Well, as you put it, I'm not enjoying the heat wave one bit. But I love this ranch and being around Jessie, and I feel as if I belong here. My belief is home is not just bricks and mortar, you know. It's where the heart is, and I've grown incredibly fond of your father-in-law. My only concern is whether you can accept me and Jessie as a couple together. My son, I'm afraid, has not taken the news terribly well. My daughter Andrea, on the other hand, thinks it's absolutely wonderful, but then again she is a huge romantic, and a firm believer in fate and serendipity, and that nothing ever happens in life by random chance.
Well, I agree with your daughter 100%, said Katina. I think it's wonderful too, you're coming together like this with Jessie. I'm also a believer in serendipity. I mean, I met Wagner here in a laundrette, would you believe it? Wagner's washing machine was on the blink, and I was staying in an apartment where the washing machine was so complicated I couldn't even work it out. It was one of those insanely sophisticated German models. I didn't want to break my friend's washing machine, so I decided to go to the laundrette to get the stuff done there. Me and Wagner got talking in the laundrette over baskets of washing, would you believe it? And then he invited me to dinner, and the rest is history. But he never proposed to me in the laundrette, I'm glad to say. I don't think it would have been desperately romantic to propose to me over the dirty laundry. And I'm not sure I'd have accepted his proposal. But if I had, I wouldn't have been disappointed, because I'm a very happily married woman. But we dated for about 3 years before he finally popped the question. So yes, I do believe in fate, like your daughter, Missy. And besides, you and Jessie look so good together, don't they, Wagner?
Wagner nodded. It's strange, but I do think you look right together. And if my wife had accepted a proposal from me in that laundrette, and we'd gone off to Vegas to get married, it would have worked. So who am I to judge your coming together like this? in such fortuitous, idiosyncratic circumstances. I've never heard anything so bizarre in my entire life. But I think you both might actually work. And certainly, Missy, if you make my father happy, that's all I actually care about."
No one had noticed that a woman was standing in the doorway, staring at everyone, looking from one face to another with bewilderment, until her eyes finally landed on Missy. It would be normal to hear a car rolling up the driveway, but everyone had been so distracted. No one had noticed that a woman was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding her children's hands, staring at everyone, looking from one face to another, until her inquisitive eyes finally settled on Missy. It would be normal to hear a car rolling up the driveway, and the dogs as they rushed out, barking excitedly to greet their new guests. But everyone had been so distracted, no one had observed a thing, not even Jessie. "What's going on here?" she asked, frowning. The woman in the kitchen, who had just entered, had silvery grey eyes and long shoulder-length dark hair. Her features were much more pinched than Jessie's. She was exceptionally skinny. That suggested to Missy that she probably had an eating disorder of some kind. But there was no doubt she was Jessie's daughter, as the family resemblance was striking, especially seen in the eyes and the nose area.
"Hello, sweetheart. It's very good to see you, love,"
said Jessie, throwing his arms affectionately around the woman, who looked to be in her late 30s, early 40s. She had 2 children with her, 10-year-old Cara and 7-year-old Curtis, both running enthusiastically over to the dogs that had returned from their stint outdoors and had chosen to lie curled up under the kitchen table. The 2 kids that clearly loved dogs eagerly threw their arms around them, completely ignoring the adults and the strange ambience in the kitchen. Missy was most sure that so absorbed were they in seeing the dogs that they had failed to notice her at all.
"Would somebody please tell me what on earth is going on here?" asked the woman. "What's all the excitement about?"
Her eyes became like sharp, thorny daggers.
"And who are you?" she asked Missy. "I've never seen you before," she said curtly, as manners were not exactly Cathy's strong point. She was known for being rather abrasive and abrupt, and could easily rub people up the wrong way. And Missy knew at once that the marriage revelations were not going to be digested well by this young woman. "This is your father's new wife, Missy," Katina explained. "They met 2 weeks ago. They got married in Las Vegas. Can you believe it?" she said enthusiastically. "Isn't it so romantic, Cathy? Missy here is from the UK, and they've already tied the knot."
"You what?"
said Cathy, putting her hands on her narrow hips defiantly and giving her father a furious glare.
"Please tell me, Dad, that this is a joke, that you're winding me up. You wouldn't do something so stupid. Please tell me you didn't."
"It's not a joke, sweetheart. This is Missy. Missy, this is my daughter Cathy. Me and Missy, we got married in Las Vegas the other day."
"Dad, what the hell is wrong with you? Why would you marry a perfect stranger like this? Are you completely insane? Do you need to be booked into a funny farm or something?"
"Don't be so dramatic, Cathy. You're not being fair. You know you're not. This is me we're talking about. And you know that every decision I have ever made has always been a wise one. And marrying Missy here was the most salient thing I've done in a long time. And I would thank you to appreciate that."
"Dad, you're crazy. You're absolutely insane."
"No, he's not," said Katina, coming to Jessie's defence.
"In India, strangers get married all the time to each other, in arranged marriages, I believe, and you know that their marriages are far more successful than Western ones are. So don't be so quick to judge."
Cathy frowned at her sister-in-law.
"What's wrong with you, Katina? You're as bad as my father. Have you got cauliflower between your ears or something? How can you possibly think marrying a stranger is a good idea? It's crazy. It's nonsensical. It's absolute madness! Dad, I don't know what you were thinking.
Missy is not a stranger to me any more, love,
said Jessie, putting his loving arms protectively around Missy.
You are not being kind, Kathy. I would like you to treat my wife with respect, or I'd like you to leave. You can choose. I have chosen Missy to be my wife. I am very happy, and I would appreciate it most greatly if you could try to be happy for the both of us.
Not being kind, Dad. I keep telling you, you're the one that's insane. I'm not being kind. Of course I'm not being kind. What the hell do you think you've done? I hope to God you haven't married a gold digger here who's after your money. Did you have a prenup? Please tell me, Dad, that you had a prenup. I'm not after your father's money, said Missy. He insisted we didn't have a prenup, but I told him to get one, but he refused. You refused, Dad, said Kathy, looking enraged. Why would you refuse a prenup, Dad? Are you insane? If you die, do you realise this woman gets everything you've got? Don't you care a jot about our inheritance?
Sweetheart, you and Wagner have been well provided for in the advent of my death. Missy here insisted upon that, but I need to leave her well provided for as well, if I die before her. I'm sure you can appreciate that, as she is my wife. So I have a responsibility to her. But if she dies, everything I left her goes to you all. She's agreed to that.
With the greatest of respect, Dad, you don't know this woman from Adam. Why you have chosen to replace our mother like this is sick. That's what it is. It is sick. If she could see you now, Dad, shackled up with another woman, it would break her heart. I know it would.
Your mother never wanted me to be alone, Kathy. If you must know, she did give me her blessing to marry someone else when she died. Not that I was remotely happy about the suggestion at the time. I could never have envisaged myself with some other woman until Missy here came along, like a gift from the gods. But when I saw her in the bar, I knew she was the one for me. It was an instinct, and my instincts have never failed me yet. It's the reason why I run a successful ranch.
Oh, Dad, please don't give me that. No one who's got any sense proposes to a woman in a bar and then just shacks up with them like that. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm not going to give you my blessing over this, not at all. I'm outraged, I'm shocked and infuriated that you would senselessly do something like this. Did you ever stop to think about how we would feel about this? Of course not. Did you think about your children? No, I expect you never gave us a second thought.
Kathy, you're being unreasonable. Don't you realise being alone on this ranch can be terribly lonely for me? I haven't been this happy in a long, long time, and I would really appreciate it if you could be happy for me.
Listen to your father. Listen to your father. Honestly, look at you, Kathy. You're being selfish and incredibly self-centred, said Katina, coming to her father-in-law's defence. You should be happy for Jessie here. I know Jessie would never do anything impulsively if he doubted his decision. I think it's all terribly romantic. I've not seen him this happy before in a long time, and I think that anyone can see Missy is a good woman. I think they look great together, and at the very least you should be happy for them. By all accounts, the lunch had been more than a little uncomfortable for all, as Kathy made no bones about how she felt about Missy having married her father. Katina and Wagner had made Missy feel warmly welcome, but Kathy paid Missy a blithe disregard and shot her thorny looks across the table. Finally she got up, pulling the chair away from her table so it scratched the kitchen floor, and she said, "I'm sorry. I can't just sit here and play happy families like this. Nor can I eat lunch with all of you. This is insanely ridiculous. I'm not remotely happy about your new arrangement, Dad. I'm really not. Come, kids, we're going."
"Don't be like this, Kathy,"
said Jessie. Like what, Dad? Why should I sit here eating lunch with you? and pretend everything is rosy in the garden when it's clearly not. If I eat lunch with you, it means I condone what you've done, and I can't do that."
"But I don't want to go, Mummy," said 10-year-old Cara. "I want to play with the doggies, and I want to stay here." "So do I," said Curtis. "I like being on the ranch. Please, Mummy, I don't want to go."
But alas, their desperate cries of protestation fell upon deaf ears, as their mulishly stubborn, opinionated mother grabbed them furiously, both by the hands. "You're coming now."
"But, Mummy, we haven't had any dessert yet," came Cara's cries. "Missy says that we're having homemade strawberry ice cream for dessert."
"We'll get ice cream on the way home," said Cathy. "Now come along," she said, sashaying out of the farmhouse, and did not so much as bid farewell to anyone. But she stopped in the doorway and stared at her father furiously as he'd followed her out. "I hope you're proud of yourself, Dad, ruining our family's lives like this. What you've done is despicable." They heard Cathy bang the front door indignantly as she left with her kids, and the sound of her angry truck swinging from a death rattle into life, and then she accelerated down the drive at a fast speed, leaving everyone in no uncertain doubt that Cathy was not a happy camper. Jessie reached out to squeeze Missy's hands. His eyes met her gaze. He gave her a wink. He could see his wife was upset by Cathy's cruel confrontation, and it grieved his heart most terribly that Cathy had been so thorny and so unkind. "Oh dear, that didn't go terribly well, did it? Cathy has not taken our news very well. But I suppose it was to be expected. I kind of had a feeling she might react like this, but I didn't think she would be so hard-hearted." "Tough titty," said Katina, making a face. "Honestly, Jessie, you'd think she'd be happy for you. She's incredibly selfish and self-centered. That's the problem with Cathy. Cathy only cares about Cathy. She has no considerations for anybody else."
"Don't be so hard on her," said Missy. "She hasn't taken the news terribly well. She probably thinks I'm trying to replace her late mother, which of course I'm not. I could never do that. But I hope she'll eventually be happy for the two of us being together." "Give her time," said Wagner. "I'm sure she will eventually come around."
1 month later. The kettle is boiling away heartily on the hob. Missy is gagging for her morning cup of English breakfast tea to get the day started, as Jessie left for the auction he chose to attend half an hour ago. In the beginning, Jessie had been a big coffee drinker, but Missy had persuaded him to try tea for a change, and he had become rather partial to it, especially when she made him strong English builder's tea, which he said in the hot weather appeared to be surprisingly refreshing. Missy felt so contented and happy in this small town in Wyoming, where all Jessie's friends had welcomed her into the community with open arms, most marvelling at their incredulous love story with an enviable admiration. "I cannot believe Jessie proposed to you in a bar, Missy," she heard over and over again from so many people in the small town, who were completely aghast about how Missy and Jessie had come together in such unlikely circumstances. One man told Missy, "This is Jessie we're talking about, Jessie Farmington. He's quietly reserved, reticently private. Jessie doesn't do this kind of thing half-heartedly, so you must have made quite the impression on him, Missy. It is the most romantic story I've heard of in a long, long time." One woman told Missy of a radio phone-in she had listened to once, where couples who had never met before got married. "I'm not actually sure if it worked out or not," she told Missy. She seemed to remember learning about the disastrous consequences of some of those choices, but could not recall all the details as the experiment had been done in the early 80s. Her memory over the experiment was so fleeting. "You and Jessie, on the other hand, look like a pair of mittens that belong together," she told Missy warmly. "I'm so happy for the both of you. Really I am. And Jessie deserves some happiness, after he so tragically lost his wife to the big sea. He was a very broken man after that, you know. I'd see him sitting alone in the bar, nursing a beer, looking so melancholic, you know, like a lost kitten. And now you come along, Missy, and he's a tiger again. You've brought the smile back to his face, and for that I'm so grateful. Someone in town had organised a huge barbecue to celebrate Missy and Jessie coming together, and there had been line dancing and a pig served on the spit. The food had been sumptuously delicious, and the pork melt in the mouth. It had been quite the most festive, joyful celebration, with much light-hearted banter and bountiful laughter, and surprisingly even the local paper had grabbed hold of the story and had done a write-up about it. The headline was splashed with the flashing headlines, "The most romantic love story of the century. Quiet rancher asks stranger in bar to marry him." Missy knew marrying Jessie was the best decision she'd made in her life. She realised home is not a country, it's a place, and it's being around the people you love. And within a month she had fallen head over heels in love with Jessie, as he had with her, and they had become inseparable in a short period of time. Yes, it was sad her children and grandchildren were far away, on the other side of the world, but she spoke to them more now on video link than she'd ever done in England, so she felt more connected to them than ever before. Her son was begrudgingly coming around to the fact that she had married Jessie Farmington, especially after Jessie had spoken to him on video link. "He's really nice, Mum," he admitted. "I can see he's good for you. He's a gentleman. Maybe your decision to marry him after all was not so wacko. But we're all going to come to Wyoming to visit you. You can be sure of that." Everyone in town could see how incredibly happy Missy and Jessie were together. They made a handsome couple. Even the steers, horses and dogs seemed positively infected by the rancher's optimistic outlook. Everywhere Jessie went, he whistled merrily to himself under his breath, so his good mood lifted up the entire ranch, almost as if it was singing a new, brighter, chirpier song. On this quiet, unassuming morning, the dogs were lazily flopping around the kitchen, after frolicking around the countryside all morning, having expunged all their energy and rather overheated themselves. All of a sudden, all three dogs sit up, their ears perk upwards, their tails thump against the flagstone floor. That's when Missy hears the tyres punching the tarmac, as they pensively roll forwards down the driveway. She then hears the car jolt and stutter rather awkwardly, finally jerking to a stop, and when the engine switches off, it's followed by a familiar, rather distinctive death rattle-like sound that she's heard before. The dogs eagerly run to the front door, barking enthusiastically, their tails wagging vigorously, as if they recognise the sound of the jolting truck. Missy glances out of the kitchen window to see who has arrived at her front door. She's certainly not expecting any fortuitous guests. It's such an exquisitely beautiful day. Even though it's dry and parched, it's bright, and the sky is a cornflower blue colour, with the brooding summits of the crepuscular mountains casting their comfortably familiar imposing signatures on the horizon. In the far distance she can see the meadow, where the steers are grazing happily, and on the right-hand side of the valley, beyond the two meadows, she can see the large congregations of sprawling trees that make up an expansive grove. She sucks in a huge deep breath when she realises that the truck squatting in her driveway like an ugly big black dung beetle belongs to Jessie's daughter Kathy, whom the couple have not seen since the rather unfortunate luncheon incident, when Kathy had indignantly barged out of the farmhouse with her children. She had made no secret of the fact that she was furious with her father for having married a perfect stranger. Missy wonders what she's doing here. Has she purposely orchestrated coming to the farmhouse when she knows her father is out, so she can tell Missy in no uncertain terms to leave her father the hell alone and to take the next flight back to the UK? She wouldn't be remotely surprised if this was Cathy's duplicitous agenda. Oh dear, she sighs to herself. I need this like a hole in the head, I really do. And to think it was such a spectacularly beautiful morning. And now Cathy's stinging presence is likely going to ruin everything. What could potentially have been such a blissfully pleasant day. Cathy slams the door of her truck behind her rather furiously, expressing a level of indignation in her erratic movements. She's come to the ranch alone, without even her children. She marches up defiantly to the front door, with a resolutely determined gait that is oddly intimidating. Missy is completely staggered by how dishevelled and deflated the woman looks from the kitchen window. Even her shirt is spilling out of her jeans, and she's not sure the woman has actually pulled up her flies. And she's pretty certain the woman is wearing her shirt inside out. What can be the matter with her? Could she be drunk? Surely not. Missy notices on closer inspection that Cathy looks as if she's shaking like a leaf. Perhaps she's upset about something. Missy could not be sure, but she needs to face the music, whatever it may be, and she has a sense of foreboding about this visit. She hurriedly sachets over to the front door and opens it cautiously before Cathy gets to it. Close up, Cathy looks absolutely dreadful, with puffy red eyes and a face that looks so blotchy it looks like she's been crying. All at once, Missy's heart melts like butter. It goes out to the poor woman, for she loathes to see anyone grievously upset, even if the person that's in a right sorry state is Jessie's cantankerous, pugnacious daughter, who has not shown any kindness towards Missy whatsoever.
Hello, Cathy. This is a surprise, says Missy. Are you all right, dear? You look, well, I don't mean to be unkind, but you look very distressed. Are you all right? Cathy's eyes are clouded with tears that she's desperately fighting back, so that her eyes almost appear glassy. Is Dad here? She says in almost a soft, vulnerable, childlike voice. I really need to see him now. Please tell me he's here. I'm so sorry, dear, says Missy gently. Jessie's at an auction, out of state this morning, I'm afraid. He won't be back for quite a while. But please come in. He looks so sad. Has something dreadful happened? My husband is cheating on me, said Cathy, tears now pouring down her cheeks like sorry raindrops on a glass pane that the state of Wyoming has been longing for, as it's been such a relentlessly dry summer. I can't believe he would do this to me. He has no idea that I know. Oh, I'm so sorry, said Missy. I don't know what to say. Come in. I'll make you a cup of sweet tea. In England we always believe sweet tea is like a band-aid. It makes everything better. And in my learned experience, it really does. I can even put a drop of brandy in it for you, to give you some Dutch courage if you like. Sounds good, says Cathy in a fragile voice. She follows Missy into the kitchen and watches the woman fussing around with the teacups. Eventually Missy places a cup in front of Cathy, and Cathy takes it appreciatively from her, her fingers shaking violently as she quickly drinks a couple of sips. But the brandy in the tea seems to steady her nerves as her fingers stop shaking. I'm really sorry to impose on you like this. I thought Dad would be here. I don't know what to do, she cries out. I love my husband, Mark, but I know he's cheating on me, and I don't know what to do about this. I don't want to lose him, but I can't pretend that any of this is all right, can I? Of course you can't, and it's not all right, dear, if he's cheating on you, said Missy. But are you absolutely sure? Supposing your suspicions are unfounded. Unfounded, said Missy. I think not. I found lipstick and a woman's underwear in his truck. Don't you think that speaks volumes? What explanation can a man have for having a lady's underwear in his truck? I'm sorry, there's no excuse for it. And no, my husband doesn't have a secret fetish for lacy knickers, if that's what you're thinking. Besides,
They're not mine."
"Well, I do admit, Kathy, that does not sound good at all, does it? I hope you confronted your husband about this perplexing matter."
"I can't confront him about it. I could lose him, don't you see? And the problem is I love him more than life itself. He's an excellent father to our children. He provides so well for the family. But I can't go on living like this, thinking that he's cheating on me behind my back all the time. The other day there was perfume on his collar, which isn't unusual, of course, because he tells me his secretary always hugs him effusively in the morning. She wears enough perfume to open up a boudoir. He always comes back home smelling of her perfume. I never thought anything of it, of course, until I found the underwear in his car under the seat. I happened to be looking for my daughter's doll. She thought she'd possibly left it in his car when he dropped her off at school. I told her it might have slipped under the car seat. And that was when I found the underwear in his car, smelling strongly of his secretary's perfume. I sat in the car crying my eyes out. I couldn't believe he would do something like this to me. I never thought he was the unfaithful type. I went back into the house, and my husband asked me why my eyes were so red. He knew I'd been ferreting around in his car, and he didn't even blink an eyelash. Can you believe that? I told him that I had a touch of hay fever. What else could I say? I was so frightened about confronting him over this. I'm scared if I tell him what I know, he'll ask for a divorce, because he's in love with his secretary or something. Imagine that! I couldn't bear it.
"I am quite sure, Kathy, that your husband would not want a divorce from you," said Missy. "Of course, I've never met him before. But he's got too much to lose, a lovely wife and 2 precious children. But to have an affair, that's certainly not acceptable, and you cannot put up with that. You should definitely confront him about this. You need to show him the evidence."
Kathy cradled her chin in her hands.
I'm scared. I'm really scared. I don't want to lose him. I love Mark. Supposing he asks me for a divorce, that's what worries me.
"Look, I don't know anything about your husband, Kathy. As I told you, I have never met him a day in my life. And when you came for lunch with your children, I could see how delightful they were. He'd be a fool to throw his relationship with you away. How have things been in your marriage of late? That's a good place to start. Have you been happy together? Are there any cracks, possibly, in your relationship? A lack of communication, perhaps?"
"Things have been great with us. We're very happy together. At least I thought we were, until of course I found the underwear. And then he asked me why I was being, so wolfish towards him. I knew about the underwear when I came to lunch that day, when you and Jessie announced that you were hitched. But last night I went to check his car again, just to make sure there was no more incriminating evidence. And you won't believe it. I found another piece of underwear under the car seat, although last time it was red. This time it was pink. And it smells of the perfume that my husband often smells of when he returns home from the office. The secretary's signature fragrance, so to speak. He must be having an affair with her."
"You found another piece of underwear under his car seat?" asked Missy, looking confounded. "That is astonishing, I must say that."
"Why are you pulling a face?" asked Kathy, staring at Missy.
"Something's not right about this," said Missy. "I smell a rat."
"What do you mean?" asked Kathy.
"Well, I don't know," said Missy. "I just think it's profoundly strange if your husband is cheating on you. It's rather reckless for twice in a row for you to find underwear under his car seat, don't you think? It's almost—"
"Almost what? Almost what? What are you saying? You think he wants me to find it?" asked Kathy, gasping. "So that I ask him for a divorce? Is that what you're saying? Please, God, no. Please don't say that."
"I don't know what I'm saying, Kathy. Don't put words in my mouth. I still do not believe your husband would willingly throw his marriage with you away, along with his 2 lovely children, and disrupt the family like that. In my experience, men rarely want to do that, unless, of course, their marriage is on the rocks. And from the sounds of things, you and your husband have been incredibly happy together. But your husband is perturbed by your offish behaviour towards him of late. If he was guilty, he'd be scared you'd found out about his affair. But he's not exactly behaving like a guilty man, is he? Something's just not adding up to me. You were astonished when you found the underwear under his car seat because you didn't expect to find it. You didn't believe your husband would cheat on you.
What are you saying, Missy?
What I'm saying, my dear, is that women usually have very good instincts and intuition when it comes to their own husbands. If their husbands are misbehaving inappropriately, they usually know about it at once. They have a hunch about these things, in my experience. Besides, when men have affairs, they go to remarkable lengths to cover up their duplicity. But for you to find 2 sets of underwear and a lipstick in his car on 2 separate occasions very recently, well, that's very sloppy on his part, if you ask me. You'd think he'd check his car thoroughly after a liaison with his lover. So something's not right. Let me ask you an interesting question, Kathy. When your husband comes back home smelling of his secretary's fragrance, does he react sheepishly or rather bashful when you point out that he smells of her perfume?
Not at all, admitted Kathy. He doesn't look guilty at all. On the contrary, he complains that his secretary wears far too much perfume. I know she does hug him when he comes in every morning. She's over-familiar, that's for sure. But he just says she's gregarious by nature. I've been to visit my husband at his office on numerous occasions. And that secretary stinks the place out with her perfume. It's pungent stuff, Missy, I'm telling you. But I think my husband does find the perfume rather offensive and a tad embarrassing, because he told me once he doesn't know how to tell her to tone it down a little. But he's got to be having an affair with her, Missy. There's no other explanation to this, especially given the underwear smells strongly of her fragrance. The woman is in her early 20s. She's attractive, of course. I mean, I can't deny that. But would my husband be interested in someone half his age, from a completely different generation?
Well, it is possible, said Missy. Of course, I'm not going to lie to you about that. Some men are interested in younger women, although why that is, I honestly don't know. Because the stats always reveal that relationships with huge age gaps don't always do desperately well. But would you describe your husband as a prudent man by any chance?
What do you mean by prudent?
Well, I mean, is he thorough in business, and even at home? What about his wardrobe? Does he leave stuff lying around randomly? Is he untidy, perhaps?
No, not at all. He's neater than I am. But what has that got to do with him cheating on me? I don't understand what you're getting at.
Well, then something's definitely off. If you say he is so fastidious in the home, why is he not fastidious in keeping his affair covered up?
Well, maybe he wants me to find out about it, said Kathy. Maybe that's why I found the underwear. Maybe he wanted me to find it.
How often does your husband tell you he loves you? Asked Missy.
He tells me he loves me all the time. He says me and the kids are his world.
Missy frowned. You see, I don't think men talk like that, do they, if they don't mean it? You're saying you've been rather off towards him in the relationship because you suspect he's having an affair with his secretary, and he doesn't understand your idiosyncratic behaviour and indifference towards him. But by all accounts, he's been the devoted husband, spontaneously telling you he loves you all the time, without being prompted in the slightest. He doesn't sound unhappy in his relationship with you, despite the fact that you've been rather insouciant towards him. When a man doesn't feel loved or fulfilled in his relationship with his wife,
That's when he might be tempted to cheat on her. But by the sounds of things, your husband has far too much to lose. I don't claim to be a private investigator, but I've been around for a long time, and I'm quite a wise woman, I think. So I wouldn't be too quick to jump on the affair bandwagon if I were you. Something else could be going on here.
But the evidence is incriminating, is it not? Said Cathy insistently.
Not necessarily, my dear. There is more to the story than meets the eye, if you ask me. And you, Missy, are going to have to confront him about this, or it's going to eat you alive.
But I don't want to. I'm so scared. I can't ask him about this.
You're going to have to, Cathy. I'm a 70-year-old woman, and I've lived longer than you have, so I've a lot more life experience behind me than you have. I think the best you can do for yourself is to find out what the hell is going on.
You're right, said Cathy. I can't go on like this. I've already lost so much weight. Some people think I'm anorexic. I'm not, you know. I just don't eat when I'm unhappy, because I get nauseously sick.
I tell you what, why don't we go for a walk in the woodgrove and decide what to do when we get back? Would you like to borrow some walking boots of mine? I've got 2 pairs, you know, that Jessie bought for me, and I notice you're a similar size to myself.
A walk? Asked Cathy. In the woodgrove? You think I should go for a walk? Are you insane? Have you seen how hot it is out there?
Not in the woodgrove, it isn't, said Missy. The grove is heavily shaded, and walking in there is absolutely beautiful and very tranquilizing. After your mother died, your father did it all the time, I believe. He said the trees gave him incredible strength, as they have such serene energy, and their energy can help ground you, you know. Walking is incredibly grounding. It helps stabilize the emotions. We can take the ATV over the meadows and walk in the grove. Whenever I'm upset, I walk. It's the best thing to do. It helps me to think. I think we should do it, don't you?
Cathy thought about it for a moment and agreed. That's what they should do. Missy knew that walks helped you to gain some perspective on things in life, and she could see that Cathy was in a huge state. She decided to make some sandwiches and to prepare a picnic, while Cathy went to the bathroom to take a nice hot shower. She surreptitiously phoned Jessie to tell him what was going on with his daughter.
Yes, can you believe it? She's having a shower at the moment upstairs. I told her a shower would do her the world of good, because she's arrived here in a dreadful sorry state. You should see her, Jessie. She is so distressed. So I've told her we're going for a walk in the woodgrove, and I'm preparing a picnic for the 2 of us. She came to the house looking for you. She wanted to tell you about her dreadful situation she's embroiled in. She was so aggrieved, I'm afraid, to find me instead of you. But I guess she's confided in me about her dilemma. She needed to get it off her chest, I suspect. Not because she saw me as an ideal confidant, of course, but it's obviously been eating her up from the inside out. She's in such a dreadful state. Sorry you've lost me, Missy. What on earth are you talking about? Asked Jessie. Why is Cathy so distressed? Oh, didn't I say? Oh, sorry, Jessie. Well, she believes her husband Mark is cheating on her. Unfortunately, she found underwear in his car, under the car seat, on 2 separate occasions, lacy underwear belonging to a woman. She's scared of approaching Mark about the matter, in case he admits to the affair. She's afraid of losing him. Jessie began to laugh at the end of the phone. What's so funny, Jessie? How can you laugh about this serious stuff? You think it's funny? I'm laughing because there is no way that Mark would ever have an affair. He's simply not the type. Believe me, I know him incredibly well. I also knew his father. 2 peas in a pod they were. Mark would never cheat on my daughter. What on earth is Cathy thinking? How could she ever think that he would do that to her? The idea is ludicrous.
The man is head over heels in love with Kathy. He'd never give another woman a passing look. He's devoted to my daughter."
That's all very well and good, Jessie. But then how on earth do you explain the mysterious lacy underwear found under Mark's car seat, smelling of his secretary's fragrance?
"As I was saying, there's something else going on here," said Jessie. "I don't know what it is, but I'll sort it out and talk to Mark about the matter privately myself. I'm sure there is a reasonable explanation going on here. Mark is not having an affair. I'm pretty sure of that. By the way, I think it's remarkable that you and Kathy are now talking together. And taking her for a walk in the grove for a picnic is a jolly good idea. It might help get her mind off her troubles and help stabilize her mood a little. She doesn't know how lucky she is to have you to confide in, Missy. You're being awfully good to her, and based on the contemptuous way she treated you when she was last at the ranch over a month ago, she doesn't deserve such kindness. But maybe this is the quintessential opportunity for her to learn what a sweet person you really are, and why you're the very best thing that's happened to me, Missy Farmington. I'm a very lucky man, I am."
"And likewise, Jessie Farmington, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I'm a very lucky lady. It works both ways, it does. I feel heartily relieved to hear you say such positive, upbeat things about Kathy's husband, as I've never met him before. But it certainly affirms my gut instincts. I don't personally think he's cheating on her, but I can't explain the underwear under the car seat. But you have a word with him about the matter, and I'll do my level best to give Kathy a good time in the grove, so that she can relax a little. She's in such a dreadful state, she is. How are you feeling, my dear?" Missy asked Kathy when she came out of the shower and began drying her limp hair with a towel. "I feel a lot better," she admitted, looking quite sorry for herself. "You were right. The hot water was terribly soothing. I feel less sticky and sweaty, and a lot calmer in my mind. It has helped a lot talking to you. I appreciate you listening." "Not at all. I know this whole stinking thing with your husband is very hard on you, my dear, and rather unsettling. But never you mind about that. We'll sort all this mess out for you in due course, and find out what's really going on here. But in the meantime, you and I are going to have some fun girly time together, and you can talk as much as you like. Get all your frustrations out. I'm a very good listener, you know. And I've prepared a delicious picnic lunch for the both of us. But let's go into the grove first, and then afterwards enjoy a nice picnic together. After your walk, I'm sure you'll feel so much better, and hopefully you'll have worked up an appetite, so that you'll eat some food for a change. We need to get some meat on those bones of yours." For a moment Kathy hung her head in shame. She looked up at Missy with rather bashful-looking eyes. "I don't know why you're being so nice to me. I really don't. I don't deserve your kindness. Why don't you absolutely hate and despise me, after the vindictive way I spoke to you when I was at the ranch a month ago? If I were you, I'd hate me." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, my dear. I'm a grown-up woman. Of course I don't hate you in the slightest. Believe it or not, I completely understand the way you feel." "You do?" "But of course I do. You grew up with your mother taking care of you, and then she tragically died of cancer, and for that you have my commiserations. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. It must have been absolutely dreadful. And then again, you never imagined your dad with anybody else, did you? As you only ever knew your mother and dad as a couple together. And then I came along. Of course it's distressing for you. If I were in your shoes, I'd likely feel exactly the same way. Human emotions, my dear, are very complicated, you know. And most of us are not desperately good at dealing with change of any kind. I know I'm not. It's been quite a change for me moving here to Wyoming.
after having lived in a little village in Derbyshire, you know. But I love being here, and I'm adapting to the change rather well. You came to the ranch after making a horrible discovery on finding the lacy underwear under the car seat in your husband's car, and that was dreadful for you. And then meeting me on top of all that must have been the straw that broke the camel's back. You poor thing. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you. I can completely commiserate with your grievances. They are very human reactions, you know, and perfectly understandable in the circumstances.
I think I misjudged you, Missy. You're really, really nice. I guess I understand why my dad likes you so much. It was just such a shock, you know, to discover he got married so fast, and he didn't even let us know about it.
Believe me, laughed Missy, it was a shock for me too. But you know, my dear, I have no intention of trying to replace your mother. That would be an impossible thing to do. But if I may, I would very much like to become a good friend of yours.
I'd like that too, said Cathy, giving Missy a hug. I'm sorry I've been like a bear with a sore head, but so much has been going on in my life, and I just can't make sense of any of it.
I told you, Cathy, my dear, there is absolutely no need for you to have to apologize to me about anything. I don't mind what you say. I can take it, you know. I've been around a long time. My son's battling to accept my marriage to Jessie, I'm afraid, but he's come a long way. But let me just say, in the beginning, he was not happy about it at all. He thought I was incredibly selfish to leave the family behind and come and settle here in America. So his reaction was much the same as yours. Perfectly natural, you know. Now let's go, shall we? I've packed a delicious picnic lunch for the both of us to enjoy, along with some homemade lemonade which I made myself. Incredibly refreshing it is in this weather. And I brought along a bottle of wine for us, so in case you fancy something rather alcoholic. I've selected an ice-cold French white wine, I think it is.
I just want to ask you one question, Missy, if I may.
But of course, ask away, dear. You're more than welcome to ask me anything you like.
Are you really happy with my dad, Missy? You're not going to hurt him, are you? And bugger off back to the UK and break his heart? I don't think I could take that. And I don't think he could either. After Mum died, he pretty much fell apart. Although he hid it well from all of us, but we knew how broken he was.
Jessie is very lucky indeed to have such a thoughtful daughter like you, Cathy. Of course I'm not going to hurt your father, Jessie. I've fallen for him hook, line and sinker. I'm totally in love with your father, you know. So that is not going to happen. There is no way I could possibly hurt him.
Good. That's all I need to know, said Cathy. I must tell you, Missy, I haven't seen him look so happy. When I met you a month back and I saw how happy you'd made him, it made me as mad as hell.
But of course it did, dear. And I understand. I really do.
Before long, Cathy and Missy were driving Jessie's ATV to the Woodgrove on the sprawling ranch, with its prepossessing magnificent backdrop of mountainous views. Missy had decided to leave the dogs in the farmhouse, which left them rather unimpressed, but they had already burnt off an excess of energy that morning. The meadows were parched and dry. They looked miserably thirsty and fatigued. The grass was yellow, the heat unforgiving and relentless. But despite everything, it was a beautifully prepossessing day, and the two women responded to it positively, and were glad they had not walked through the meadows to get to the grove, as the merciless heat would have sapped their energy. But riding the SUV with dark glasses and hats was fun, and the two women giggled together as they approached the grove. It seemed like the outing had put a smile on Cathy's face, whom admitted it had been a long while since she'd done something like this.
There's something I find about the trees, Missy confided in her, especially when you hang around old oaks like this. I think it's the energy they exude, you know. It's very tranquilizing, and they put our problems into perspective, I find.
They parked the ATV outside the grove, and the two women happily walked through the trees, while Missy carried the picnic basket in her hands. It was a lovely day for a picnic, she thought, and despite the bad start she'd had with Cathy from their previous encounter, she was glad for this perfect opportunity of spending time with the young woman and getting to know her a whole lot better. Perhaps they could begin again with their friendship, as Cathy was being very amenable towards her now, grateful for her listening ear and her salient advice. The Woodgrove welcomed both women with open arms, almost as if reacquainting with long-lost friends. It was so beautifully cool walking among the trees, under the umbrellaed canopy of their outstretched boughs. It was like leaving behind a sizzling sauna and entering an air-conditioned luxury hotel lobby. Everything smelt delightfully fresh and woody. The twisted, contorted trees, with their gnarled, knotted boughs feathered by verdant leaves, were beautiful to behold, and would have been an absolute delight for any artist to paint, as every tree in itself was sculptural and unique, many weathered, worn, panelled and beaten by the grueling elements in their fight for survival, and in the process embodied their own individualistic expressions of beauty. The wondrous oak trees in Jessie's Woodgrove had been around for an awfully long period of time, and their mature, powerful trunks unambiguously stole space, but their statuous, resplendent presence made both women feel a calmness flood over their beings, as being in the presence of such wizened, well-established earthly energy that had been in the grove for over 300 years was both cathartic and grounding. It would seem between the leafy branches of the trees trickled a soft ethereal light that peppered the grove in a fairy tale-like golden glaze, so that Missy found her imagination wandering off towards the wistful stories her mother had told her as a little girl.
"You're right, Missy," Cathy admitted. "I do feel better surrounded by the trees."
"I told you so," said Missy, looking pleased. "I must admit, Cathy, my dear, you're looking a lot more relaxed and less flustered, and that's the whole point of our coming here. Now let's find a lovely place to lay down our stuff. Then we can come back for the picnic after we've had a walk."
Missy put the picnic basket under an oak tree, along with a blanket which she laid on the ground.
"We'll come back for refreshments later. I've packed cheese and ham sandwiches on Turkish bread for us. I brought along grapes and peaches and a pecan nut pie. So I hope you're going to be hungry later. How does that sound, my dear?"
"Oh, Missy, you're so kind. It sounds absolutely lovely. I'm looking forward to it," said Cathy appreciatively. "It seems like you've thought of everything. My late mother was like that, you know."
"Well, I've always personally enjoyed picnics myself, from when I was a little girl," said Missy. "Every year my parents would take us to the Lake District in England. We'd go for long walks in the countryside, followed by trips to the pubs where we'd enjoy pub grub, delicious pints of beer. Sometimes we'd buy English fish and chips all wrapped up in newspaper. There's nothing like it, you know. Foreigners come from all over the world to take walks in the Lake District. It's so beautiful there. But after a walk, we take picnics with us, and nothing beats eating al fresco, let me tell you."
"I'd heartily agree with that," said Cathy wistfully. "Personally, I love eating outdoors." The two women talked happily together as they walked through the grove, returning from their long walk to their picnic spot, looking infinitely more invigorated and relaxed. They found the little clearing under the old oak tree, where the picnic basket was resting under the tree. They both gratefully sank back onto a blanket, drinking in the pretty view of the grove. "It's beautiful in here," said Cathy, as Missy opened the picnic basket. She gasped when she discovered all the Tupperware containers were empty, and in one container she found 2 large, freshly caught trout. "What's wrong?" asked Cathy. "Your face has gone completely white." "It's just I packed a picnic lunch, and now it's all gone, apart from the lemonade and the wine. But someone has put 2 beautiful trout in the basket. There are also some stones in this Tupperware container," she said, shaking the Tupperware container like a rattle and furrowing her forehead in bewilderment. "Is this some kind of a joke?" asked Cathy, her eyes growing wide with amusement. Of course it's not a joke. I told you I packed everything in these containers. And the pecan nut pie as well. It's also missing." The two women stared at the fish in confoundment, and then they cracked up laughing. "You think this is funny, Kathy?" said Missy, unable to stop giggling herself. "I packed us a delectable lunch, and now it's completely vanished. And we have two fish staring at us in the Tupperware container like this, and nothing else." All of a sudden the two women heard a startling movement, cracking, snapping and popping of what appeared to be twigs, a heavy shuffling sound, and then a thumping movement that sounded rather like ponderous footfall moving towards them. And then a flash of memory darted back into Missy's mind as she recalled the strange hairy man that she'd encountered in the grove, that had scared the bejesus out of her so much that she'd passed out from fear, and had woken up outside Jessie's farmhouse, and was in no doubt that the creature, whatever it was, had brought her back to safety. But she had no recollection of being carried from the grove to the farmhouse. It would seem after the idiosyncratic event she had persuaded herself that it had all been a dream, but she knew now with certain conviction that the heavy footfall belonged to the same creature that she'd first encountered when she'd taken a walk in the grove, and it must be that he was moving towards them now. She sat there unmovingly, staring towards the trees, where the distinctive sound could be heard. "Someone is there," said Kathy rather nervously, pointing towards the trees, where flashes of black could be seen. But then there he was, larger than life, standing before them, staring at them through benevolent, dark, treacle-coloured eyes. This time Missy did not faint, but stared at the creature in wondrous awe, knowing now that her last encounter had not at all been a figment of her imagination. It was Kathy whose eyes widened, whose mouth dropped wide open. The creature moved towards them, with the other Tupperware container in his hand. He rubbed his stomach appreciatively and handed the container to Kathy. He spoke to both women in a language that neither of them could understand, but in their head it was miraculously translated into English. "Maninatwana, kilatikanemu, lisana swa." "How very nice of you. It was delicious. I hope you like the fish. Tila kila pola sakana swa. I caught them myself this morning in the lake," he said, pointing towards the far right of the property. Thank you, said Kathy. "That's most kind of you." "Kolita piqua, humasata kina. Glad to see that you are both well. Monti casina, holopatikwa. You gave me a shock when you fainted last time," he said, pointing at Missy. "Polita caquila. You were out for the count. I had to take you back to your farmhouse. Hilani taquasana, hopotolo shaka, hi kalinolobono, akilaswa. I'm sorry if I scared you. I didn't mean to. I'm quite a big fellow, you know. Sometimes I forget that. I forget that I can be intimidating to many, but I'm harmless, really. Hila taquanasa." "You don't look scary at all," said Kathy. "You look very nice." "Kila tikwa, hisati shakinalapwa, sisa." You should be careful, young lady, what you say, for I can read your thoughts clearly. And you do think I look rather scary." "Well, maybe just a little bit, but you can't help that, can you? I mean, you're very big." "Kani qualasa, just so you know," said the creature, pointing at the picnic basket. "Kila tila puana. I like the sweet thing with the nuts. Very nice indeed. I've got quite the sweet tooth, you know." "Me too. I've also got a sweet tooth," said Kathy, giggling. "I love pecan nut pie. It's my absolute favourite. That's what you enjoyed." Kathy spoke to the creature with such a familiarity, as if she'd known him all her life. "Bali casa kwana, ila kikwasa. Anyway, thank you very much for the treats,
but I better be getting back."
The creature then nodded at them, turned around and glided away. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Did that just happen? Did that just happen? Tell me, Missy, that happened. Do you realise that was a Bigfoot? I can't believe it. We've encountered a Bigfoot. This is like a dream. It's incredible." "I've actually seen him before," Missy admitted, "but I must confess I thought it was a dream at the time. I fainted and he must have carried me straight back to the farmhouse." "And you didn't think to tell anyone about this? This is incredible, absolutely incredible. And don't you think he was so nice, Missy? I'm happy he got our picnic. And he gave us 2 beautiful fish. We should go back to the farmhouse and cook the fish at once. They're fresh. There's nothing more delicious than fresh fish." All of a sudden they heard male voices. One of them belonged to Jessie, and the other one was Mark's. Kathy's face went white. "What's my husband doing here?" she asked. "I'm so sorry, Missy. I did phone your father while you were in the shower to tell you what was going on. He laughed when I told him you thought Mark was having an affair. He said he was going to sort this all out." Kathy gasped. "Oh my God! My dad's gone and told Mark. How could he do that?" Moments later, Jessie and Mark were walking towards the 2 women seated under the oak tree, and Mark stared at his wife incredulously. Missy decided he was a rather good-looking man, and that Kathy had married someone who bore an uncanny resemblance to her own father.
"Why on earth did you not tell me, Kathy, that you thought I was having an affair? This explains a lot of things to me. Why you've been behaving so strangely recently. This is crazy. I'd never ever cheat on you. Surely you know that. When Jessie phoned me to tell me this, and what was going on in your head, I had to come at once to explain everything to you. How could you possibly think I would cheat on you?"
"Well, explain yourself then. How come I found 2 sets of underwear on 2 separate occasions under your car seat? As far as I'm concerned, that's incriminating evidence," said Kathy scathingly.
"Well, I did not put the underwear there. I do sometimes give that secretary of mine a lift home. I often stop at a gas station to fill up with gas, and I leave her in the truck. Maybe she planted the underwear under the seat for you to find. That, I suspect, is what must have happened."
"But that makes no sense at all," said Kathy. "Am I really expected to believe that? It's awfully convenient, don't you think? You stop at a gas station and she sneakily puts her underwear under the truck seat. I mean, why would she do that, Mark?"
"Because, my love, I don't know how to put this gently, but my secretary's got a bit of a thing for me. I thought I was managing the situation tactfully. I really did. But my secretary has been making overtures towards me. I told her she was an attractive woman, because I wanted her to feel good about herself, and not bad about the fact that I'd given her the obvious brush-off. I thought she got the message, I really did, but it seems she wanted more from me than I was prepared to give. She knows I'm devoted to you, but maybe that's made me all the more irresistible in her eyes. Don't they say you always want what you can't have? I told her I wasn't interested in her because I was a happily married man, with 2 beautiful children. The truth is, even if I wasn't happily married, I'd never give that woman a second glance. I can assure you of that. She's coquettishly flirtatious all the time, touching me up with her long manicured fingernails, fixing my tie up all the time, which she claims is crooked when it really is not. She actually shakes her head, would you believe it, and says, "Mark, dear, oh dear, what would you do without me to sort you out?" She fixes up my tie, is very familiar, and fails to appreciate the boundaries between boss and employee. I find her incredibly patronizing, although I suspect she thinks she's being very flirtatious towards me. She's a good secretary, which is why I've put up with her for so long. but clandestinely hiding her underwear under the car seat, to make it look as if I'm having an affair with you, so you ask me for a divorce, is going a tad too far. She knows you use my car twice a week for the main supermarket shop, so maybe she thought you'd look under the seats and discover the underwear. I'm astounded she would do such an abysmal thing. But to be fair, I'm equally shocked that you would believe I would ever cheat on you. No wonder you've been so off with me recently. It explains a whole lot. I've been asking you what's wrong, and you've kept shutting me down. We could have resolved this in minutes if you'd confided in me. I wish you had."
"You think that this is what your secretary did?" asked Cathy, looking confounded. "She hid the underwear under the seat. I never told you, Mark, about it because I didn't want to lose you. I was so scared you'd fallen in love with her."
"Oh, please, give me some credit," said Mark, scoffing. "You're the only woman for me, Cathy. You should know that. Let's sort this out now, shall we? I hope we can get a signal in the grove with all these trees around."
It was a while before Mark found a clearing in the woods, where he called his secretary.
"Denise speaking. Is that you, Mr. Falconer?" "Yes, it's me." "Is everything all right, Mr. Falconer? You left in a dreadful rush." "Well, no, everything is not all right, Denise. Can you explain to me why your underwear got under my car seat on 2 separate occasions?"
"I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Falconer."
"I've been regularly giving you lifts home as a matter of courtesy, and on 2 separate occasions I've stopped at gas stations, when you have obviously planted your underwear under my car seat for my wife to find, who claims it smells strongly of your perfume. I know it's yours, Denise. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to split me and my wife up?"
"Of course not, Mr. Falconer. Why would you get that idea? I'd never ever do that. I respect the fact that you're a happily married man. You've made that very clear to me, Mr. Falconer."
"I have, haven't I?"
"But of course you have, Mr. Falconer. I think my underwear must have accidentally spilt out of my purse. I always carry extra underwear around with me. That must have happened. I do apologize for that."
"Just so you know, in the circumstances, Denise, I shall not be lifting you back home in future. Furthermore, while we're on the subject, if my tie is skew, I would appreciate it if you didn't try and fix it for me. I find you're being overly familiar with me, Denise, and I would also appreciate it if you could respect the boundaries between us. And while we're on the subject, could you tone down the perfume you wear to the office, Denise? I would appreciate that very much. I find it far too overpowering."
"Oh, of course, Mr. Falconer. I do apologize." Jessie was smiling as he drew his daughter into a warm hug.
"I knew that Mark didn't have it in him to cheat on you, you silly little minx."
"I just want to say I'm sorry, Dad, for being so horrible about Missy. She's been so good to me. You've found yourself a treasure. You really have."
"Of course I have," said Jessie, winking. "I wouldn't ask anyone in a bar to marry me. Not just anyone, would I?"
It's been over 7 years since that event, and Jessie and Missy remain very happily married, and the relationship between the couple and their children, on both sides of the family, has grown in leaps and bounds, and the family have come to accept that Missy and Jessie clearly belong together. Missy still occasionally leaves a basket in the woodgrove containing plenty of pecan nut pie for her Bigfoot friend, who she's seen on several occasions, and he occasionally leaves her fish on the front doorstep. She feels most certain that the Bigfoot looks out for the family, and she did not know of their existence until she moved to America. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story, and what a fabulous ending. Isn't it wonderful how they all came together and began to accept Missy in the family, and so that everybody's enjoying themselves on that ranch now.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.